Suresh, we're going to go live in a minute.
Understood. Got that.
Suresh, we're about to go live, so I'll do a countdown.
Yep. Countdown will help.
In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the grand global finals of the Climate Launchpad. Climate Launchpad is the world's largest green business ideas competition. Climate Launchpad is part of the Climate-KIC entrepreneurship programs. Climate-KIC, in turn, is part of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. We started in 2014 with 14 countries participating, and in 2020, we have participation from 58 countries around the world. Our goal, as you probably already know, is to help fix climate change one startup at a time. Climate change is a problem that has to be fixed at local, national, and global level. And that's why today's grand finals is all about ideas for business that have potential to transform local, national, and global environmental issues. Over the next few hours, you will meet speakers from all over the world, and that includes government officials, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, passionate activists, and community organizers. My name is Suresh Venkat. I'm a journalist based out of Mumbai in India, and I will be moderating this room for the next few hours. This year, Climate Launchpad had over 3,000 entries from around the world and 68 finalists from 58 countries who pitched their startup ideas. Today, you will see the world's top 16 startups compete for the grand prize. Now, let's start with a message from one of the most important environmental voices in Europe. The European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, Virginijus Sinkevicius, is with us. He sent us his video message. Take a look.
Dear innovators, I'm always eager to talk to creative minds, the ones that live and work with an idea to change the world for better. Current world, so-called a new reality, is the perfect place for such minds. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit us hard. It has thrown a sharp light on our vulnerabilities, and hopes that our future will become less disruptive are not realistic. New trends and shocks will continue to affect our lives. On the other hand, it presents us with opportunities that we cannot afford to miss. While we are staring at black swans, we tend to forget that there is a crisis which is not sudden. It does not force us to close borders or stay at home, but it is dangerous. It is a climate and environment crisis. The recent World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report ranks climate change and related environmental issues as the top 5 risks in terms of likelihood and impact for the next 10 years. It's the first time in the survey's history that one category has occupied all 5 of the top spots. It's time for us all to agree that there is no time for short-term fixes. Tackling climate change and environmental degradation is this defining task of our generation. The European Green Deal is our response. It's our new growth strategy, our long-term solution, and an essential element of our efforts to recover from the crisis more resilient. The beauty of it is that it's driven by scientific evidence and economic logic. This is why the European Commission took action to ensure that resource use is decoupled from economic growth by promoting the transition to a circular economy. This is why we took ambitious steps to fight biodiversity loss and restore natural ecosystems. This is why pandemic does not force us to step back. the EU will stick to its 2050 climate neutrality objective and challenge anyone to beat it so the whole of humanity wins. Even more, we just proposed more ambitious climate targets by 2030. Let me tell you, investing in green growth pays back and will help us to build back better. Therefore, our financial package for the economic recovery highlights the need to invest in key green sectors. Investments in a smart, circular economy, clean energy, climate-proof buildings, or sustainable food. But we have to admit that public money can only provide a tiny part of the green investments needs. Europe also needs extraordinary ideas. Thus, Europe turns to businesses, startups, and innovators. The Green Deal offers innovative businesses a coherent vision for sustainable and resilient business models, which are biodiversity friendly, low carbon, and circular. We will support decision makers to
Hi, welcome back. Let's invite our first speaker, Franz Notter. Franz, can we have you?
He's on his way.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Franz Notter while we're waiting. Franz founded ClimateLaunchpad in 2014 as a European competition with 11 participating countries. The program is currently live in 58 countries actually across the globe. Franz's work is always about innovation and entrepreneurship with a focus on clean tech. Franz also set up the EIT Climate-KIC Startup Accelerator program with over 1,000 startups enrolled and 600 million euros attracted in funding so far. The innovation platform chaired by the Dutch Prime Minister and Knowledge Man. Franz, welcome.
Good morning.
All right, Franz, tell us more. How's the work looking where you sit?
First of all, I want to thank you for willing to host us this morning. We're very grateful for that. It's amazing that we can do that. You can do that from India, and I can do that from the Netherlands. So for me, it's a bit of a day of mixed feelings. So normally we would have a room full of entrepreneurs from all over the globe, and of course that's not possible in times of COVID-19. And I'm sort of stunned and amazed how we could pull this together anyway. So that's super inspiring. It's also the first time we had the EU Commissioner open our meeting, open our conference. So Virginia Sinkevicius, thank you for your inspiring words. And it's one of those things that is possible now because we don't have to travel. So although it's a bit painful, it's also pretty fascinating to see all the opportunities that open when you sort of are forced to think about the outside the box. Yeah, so Climate Launchpad 2020, we are in almost 60 countries this year. We had more than 3,000 teams sign up, and I've seen the pitches yesterday. It's super inspiring. There's many great teams, and in a way, I think COVID-19 is sort of a metaphor for what we're trying to deal with climate change. So of course, it's terrible. It's a terrible pandemic. People are dying, and you can see in how some countries respond and others that we can actually do a lot about it. And some countries fail to do that effectively. So we're really good at creating mess, as we show with climate change as well. We created this mess ourselves. What I find super interesting is that there are right now about 170 teams across the world working day and night to come up with a solution. And I have no doubt if you have 170 teams with really smart people being super focused, give them enough funding so they can actually do all the work they need to do, that we will come up with a solution for COVID-19. We will find a vaccine. We will find medical solutions to treat people that got sick. It's already better than it was at the start, and we will get better, and we will certainly beat this. And the same is true for climate change. Now, the difference between COVID-19 and climate change is that COVID-19 is a well-defined problem. It's sort of narrow. It's really clear. It's a virus. We know we basically know how to do this. We just need some time. If you look at climate change, it's a whole host of problems. It's thousands of little problems, and some of them are super big. So we're not going to need 170 teams, we're going to need 170,000 teams. And if we have across the world 170,000 teams working on 1,000 problems that are all part of climate change, I have no doubt that humanity can completely fix this. And if you look at the past 40 years, it's basically what we've been doing in certain areas. So if you look at energy production, I believe about 75% of newly installed capacity last year in new electricity production was sustainable energy. So it was wind or solar or offshore wind or hydro, whatever it is. And we built that in 40 years. And there's no doubt in my mind that we can completely build an economy that doesn't need any oil at all. We'll just take the carbon from the atmosphere. We'll make anything that we need with it. Nature has been doing it for 1 billion years, so we can do it too. So, you know, in this mess of COVID-19 and all of us struggling and many people hurting, I see a silver lining of how good humans also can be in fixing problems. And that's what we've always tried to build with Climate Launchpad. You know, we say we try to fix climate change one startup at a time. And because we are now in so many countries, it's also basically one country at a time. And that's what we'll keep doing.
Franz, I think it was British Prime Minister Winston Churchill who said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, many said it, but he certainly said it. Yeah, probably is one of the first. Yeah, yeah.
So my question to you is this. How can startups use this crisis?
Well, so one of the things that we teach the startups in the program is that the most powerful way to develop your idea is to be in as much interaction with your potential customers as possible. And that used to be really expensive because, you know, you had to get meetings with these people. You had to visit them. You needed to travel, and travel could be expensive, takes a lot of time. And if you would do it over phone, you know, you don't, it's less intimate, so it's less powerful. And also people would be not that willing to share. So if you would talk to someone in a large company, it's much easier to get them to trust you if you're in a meeting room. And the thing, of course, is look at us, you know, we're across the globe. Yeah, we're 3.5 time zones away from each other, and we have a normal conversation. And this has become the new norm. So doing customer discovery, interacting with customers through video has become much more normal. So the cost of that part of building your startup, figuring out who your customer is and whether they could be your customer, it's easier. So there's certainly an opportunity there. The other thing, of course, is there's, you know, if we've proven one thing is, the world doesn't collapse if we stop traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Some companies do collapse and people lose their jobs and companies crash, so it's painful. And I'm not saying it's a good thing. But the world has proven that we don't need to travel as much as we did, for sure. And things still sort of seem to work. Now, I'm one of the people that loves to travel. I find it one of the most enriching things that I can do. I remember vividly being in India a few years ago, doing Climate Launchpad there and meeting all those wonderful people. It's such an enrichment of our lives to be able to travel. So again, I'm not saying we shouldn't travel, but as it turns out, the second best alternative, what we do now, is pretty good for most cases. So we can travel less and still have very meaningful lives, have meaningful businesses. So there's just two, and there's people that jump on. Here, I got for later today. I'll be in the studio. You know, there's a whole industry of people making beautiful masks and so on. So entrepreneurs will always find ways to sort of come up with creative solutions.
All right, next question for you, Franz. Some of the world's best clean tech startups will win prizes today, but what's the real prize? Is it getting funding? Is it getting paying customers? Is it exiting your business at a high valuation? Mm-hmm. In your view, what's the real prize? Or is it making a difference to the world? What's the real prize for a startup?
There's two things, I think. From a personal perspective, I don't think there's anything quite like trying to bring your idea into the world. I think it's one of the most powerful things a human can do. Like, for instance, Climate Launchpad, I will always be very proud how that happened. and how we now have entrepreneurs from 60 countries, thousands of entrepreneurs working on this, and knowing they're not alone. I mean, it's not my achievement that they're doing their business, but my achievement is they know they're not alone. They're in 59 other countries. There are people just as crazy as them. Just knowing that will give you more strength. So bringing something that is very personal from you into the world is huge. And if you become rich with it or not, if it fails or not, it's a huge learning experience. And I know we've been doing this for a while now, and I've been working for startups for more than 10 years, and I've seen thousands of them. Once you get that bug that you can actually bring something into the world, it's very hard to get rid of. Whether you work in a large company after your startup, whether you keep trying to do your second company, doesn't really matter. It's a very powerful, empowering thing to know that you can do much more than you thought. So that's the first thing that we try to give people in this program. And then the other thing, of course, is how do you build a successful company? Well, it's not convincing judges that you are really smart or that you have a really smooth storyteller. Who cares? Google never won a prize pitching. These big companies, they were all founded before we had programs like ClimateLaunchpad. There were no startup competitions in the old days. Now, the real prize, of course, is finding paying customers. And the only way to find paying customers, if you really understand them, and if you have identified a real problem that you try to solve. That's the real prize in the end.
Frans, final question to you. What's different about this year's edition of the Launchpad? How is this year different from previous years, other than the obvious COVID lockdown and restrictions?
I already know what teams are going to be in the final tomorrow. You don't. We'll announce it in a few hours. Okay. But what has struck me this year is how diverse it all is in terms of countries that have come up with very strong ideas. So the strength in globally has been very inspiring for me. It seems that this is not going away. This is starting to look more and more interesting. If you're an investor, for instance, I would certainly watch the finals. If you have a few investor buddies in India, I would tell them to watch tomorrow between 1 and 5 European time, because there's going to be some really interesting ideas there. It's really early days for them. They're all very early stage, but it's super interesting.
We'll tell the entrepreneur community in India. I'm sure the investors will all be watching. Frans Nauta, founder, Climate Launchpad. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, Suresh, so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Paris Thomas. He's the co-founder and CEO of Chrysalis Leap. It's Cyprus's first accelerator program specializing in clean tech. It's a private initiative aimed at helping entrepreneurs tweak, pivot, pitch, and grow their ideas into investment-ready business opportunities. Our next guest, Paris Thomas.
And here I am.
Yes, hi, Paris. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
The floor is all yours, but first tell us what you really do for a living.
Okay, well, I like what I really do for a living. I think the simplest way I can describe what I do is I help new companies start and old ones stay alive. So that kind of implies that I'm working both with startups and corporates. I work with startups exclusively in clean tech, and I've been involved in Climate Launchpad from its inception. I'm the national lead here in Cyprus for Climate Launchpad and a regional partner of Climate-KIC. So lots of stuff, not only at stage 1, which is what we consider Climate Launchpad, but also stage 2, which is the business modeling. And one of the key things, actually cool things about what's been happening in the last probably 7-8 years now, is that corporates are looking to startups to learn how to start new products and services, which is not how it used to be. It used to be the exact opposite thing. Startups are looking at corporates and envying them and trying to be them. And now we have this coin that's been flipped, in favor of startups, actually, where corporates are looking at them. So what I do is I help corporates think like startups. And that's sort of the premise of what I've been involved in. I'm heavily focused in innovation and business modeling that leads companies to de-risk new products and services and launch them in the market with minimizing the risk for failure.
And apparently you have a few cool tricks to show us, Paris. You want to show us
So-
some of it?
Yeah, so basically what I think is interesting, and following up on what your conversation with France about, the whole COVID situation, it's affected everybody and everybody's business. And my motto is that you need to stay relevant. It's not an option, it's a survival tactic. And so amidst this whole sort of change in the world, I've been affected tremendously. In fact, when the lockdown started happening, I canceled 22 flights. And that's been my reality for years now, traveling to my clients' locations and traveling quite heavily. And so that just came to a halt when the lockdowns happened. And so I started wondering, what do we do now to stay relevant? How can we convert into something that was a very interactive workshop, very engaging? I mean, come on, we're talking innovation here, right? It has to be something that is sort of at the top of the scale when it comes to cool, interactive workshops. How do you make that possible using these tools and Zoom and all sorts of other streaming tools? And it was a bit of a 2-3 month process of thinking of how to pivot my business in order to be able to offer that value through the net. And so I think it's possible, and maybe some people can be inspired by this. I know it's quite possible if you kind of put your mind to it and watch a bunch of YouTube videos. I think I must have watched maybe 80 hours of YouTube videos on how to create a setup and what you need to do. And so here's a quick little demo of the kind of stuff that you can do when you have the ability to sort of learn, because that's all it takes. Here's a moment. So let's start with the fact that I'm back in a plane now, right? I'm just walking around, hey, I miss you, that kind of thing. And everybody, I'm sure, is wanting to have this moment again. And that moment where you're just sitting on the plane and waiting for, sorry, that's mine, waiting for everybody to just, relax and enjoy the flight. And it goes on, because what you do is you use a green screen or a blue screen, video connections, and your imagination, and anything is possible. And so for me, what was a key learning was which industries were to the ones that were leading this game from which you could learn from. So I started asking myself that question: which are the industries in the world that are leading the live streaming space? And as I got to sort of research, I realized that there was, gamers. Gamers are actively using this technology to, up their game online so you can actually monetize that experience. Then you have a completely different industry. I did not expect this. Houses of worship, which was basically mostly North America, churches that were experts at streaming the service online. And like everything, innovation starts from two other industries, which is usually war and adult films. So these are the three industries that were kind of leading the game. But the focus that I had was on gamers. And here's an example of a gamer. This guy's called Ninja. And he is 20-something and a multi-millionaire. This is his setup. And mine is exactly the same, minus the samurai swords, the LED lights, the cool gaming chair. Yeah, it's not exactly the same. Mine is probably more like this. So this is from churches. And so what you have is this amazing kind of DIY hacking new market out there that I call the prosumer, where the pro would be the TV studio, the amateur would be your average YouTuber with a webcam, and you have this sort of midpoint of the prosumer who wants to get access to the features that TV studios have, but it's been difficult so far. So some companies started offering these products, and here's a little joke. The one company that's kind of leading this path and is really offering all their services to churches is called Black Magic. And I think there's an irony in that. And so these Black Magic boxes find their way in churches and they're able to stream their service. And what the main difference, as I wrap up, what I think is an interesting topic for how people can think of how they do something more interesting that keeps people engaged online, is to understand the difference between live and real time. And what you're watching now is live. So the audience, what you're watching is live. It means it's live, but it's not really. What I mean by that is there's that buffer time of 20 seconds to 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But what I'm watching here with Suresh is real time, because he's asking me a question, I'm getting it instantly. When you crack the nut of how to do something real time and be able to interact with the audience, I think that's when things come together. So that's where we've pivoted as a business. I don't think that there's an excuse for somebody not to pivot. Many businesses, by nature of their business model, will not be able to figure it out right away. But if, for example, you're a restaurant and you haven't started delivering yet, that's a problem, right? So everybody needs to go back to step one and say, how do we pivot our business model to survive the pandemic and use that later as an opportunity to even be more competitive? And that's what's happening around the globe right now. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit is just absolutely amazing.
Paris, it might be relatively easy for a small company to pivot. What happens when a large company suffers? A large airline, for instance, how do they pivot?
Right. So then that's the biggest things that one of the sort of the main challenges that I'm dealing with is talking to those large enterprises. And you're looking at pharmaceuticals who are trying to go digital, right? For example, their business model is always predicated on research and development, blockbuster drugs. Now they're dealing with razor thin margins. But for years now, they've been trying to kind of break into digital. Same thing with airlines. If you start to look at and unpack their business model, which has been predominantly very sort of one-track minded, and this was the exception, the question now is not necessarily pivoting, it's more survival so that they can have the resources to think once they're back on their feet, how do we diversify our revenue? How do we pivot into services that allow us to stay afloat? But it's difficult with airlines because it's the one thing that's affected the most. So I have no idea what they can do, but I'm sure that there's many people in rooms constantly talking about what do we do to bring in some revenue streams to diversify us and make us stay alive. So that, I think it's a question of time, and it's not a question if it's possible or not. We'll figure it out. We always do.
Paris, tell us a little bit more about what kind of startups are top of mind when it comes to Cyprus and clean tech. What are some of the top areas that companies are working on?
Definitely. And we've had a really nice selection of startups this year and many other years that we've participated in ClimateLaunchpad. Cyprus is, I would say, if you were to kind of pinpoint one industry that it's big in and one industry that we have a lot of startups that are always looking to create value in, that would be shipping. Obviously, because of our location, it's a big shipping hub, and there's a lot of shipping headquarters here. We have favorable tax regimes that also is attractive to them, which means there's clients here, there's head offices, and there's people to talk to. And we've had a lot of startups over the years, and we have some this year as well, who have value propositions related to shipping. What is also interesting to note is that many startups who may have a value proposition that is not directed to the shipping as a customer can easily be adapted to shipping. A ship is a microcosm of everything, right? You need every solution on there. And maybe a startup is not thinking of shipping, they might be thinking of hospitals for something. But with a little twist, a shipping company can also become a client. So we find it our job to make sure we actually use those startups, not just from Cyprus, but from the entire network of Climate-KIC, to say, hey, what if you sold to shipping? What would change? What would be the value? And so that we find that to be a role that we're involved in very actively.
What's the biggest challenge you face when you advise a company? Is it the founder's ego? Is it the structure of the company? Is it the nature of the industry?
The biggest challenge always is people, and what that relates to in corporate, it's culture. What I do is go into companies and tell them we need to fail as quickly as possible, and that is not always met with open arms, right? They have to have the culture already that accepts failure. So dealing with that, creating an ecosystem for innovation within large enterprises that are to the level of Fortune 500s, having the conversations with leadership to be able to enable that kind of type of mentality. Jeff Bezos said we weren't failing fast enough, right? How many Jeff Bezos do you know? So it's being able to inspire people, to show them how the best way we learn is through our mistakes, which is exactly what's happening with this global pandemic. We're going to fix a lot of things that led us to this disaster, and that's the best learning. And so it's accelerating everything. Failure is the biggest catalyst, the biggest accelerator for learning. And so that biggest challenge for me is to get people to buy into that, understand that, and even bigger challenge, to pay for that, to pay to fail.
That is final question for you. The companies that are participating in the Climate Launchpad, their stated goal is to make the world a better place through climate action, through entrepreneurship, and through products and services. But there are many companies whose stated goal is profit, for instance, a big shipping company. What can they do to make the world a better place by pursuing profit, I guess?
If we take the example of shipping, one of the things that they are already doing is they're paying attention. One of the biggest sponsors and major partner for years now in everything we've done for clean tech here in Cyprus is a shipping company. Bernard Schulte Ship Management is one of our biggest supporters. They're actively, I'm sure a lot of people from the company are watching right now, because for them, it's about being able to figure out what solutions help us mitigate climate change, but at the same time, don't shut down the company. And that's what you have, the two extremes, right? You have the people who say, shipping is really harmful, they should stop. That's not reasonable. You can't just stop shipping. There's a ripple effect that happens with that. And then you have sort of the other side, which is it's all about profit. And I think from what I've seen, at least with my interactions, is we're no longer at any of the extremes. We're somewhere in the middle where we're trying to find that sweet spot to say, what can we do that gives us early wins, direct impact, so we can all believe in it and we can all rally others to believe in it, so we can go for the even more audacious goals. What are some of the things? And we already see a lot of shipping companies acquiring these startups that do offer clean tech solutions to incorporate them onto the ship, with whatever difficulty comes with, because changing a ship is not easy, right? So we're figuring it out, maybe baby steps at a time, but we're going to get there because there's the willingness. And every conversation about profit is always related to some sort of connection to how do we have a triple bottom line. And I think that's very encouraging.
All right. Nice, Thomas. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Our next guest is William Ferreira. William is an international professional strategic policymaker in ecosystems, biodiversity, agriculture, forestry, and land use issues in relation to local and indigenous people, business, non-profits, and government. William's focus is to mainstream ecosystems in the agendas of farmers, business, and policy through learning by doing and by scaling up of practical solutions. Hello, William.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Or good evening.
It's good afternoon for me. I'm based in Mumbai in India, so it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here. Nice to meet you. A quick note to the audience watching the show: if you have any questions for William or any of the other panelists, please just send us your questions through the Q&A function, and we will pose them to the panelists. William, over to you. Tell us what you do.
Yes, I have some slides. Shall I put them on?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So my main work is that I'm trying to, wait, I'll share them. Oh, I can't, I'm disabled to screen sharing. So maybe someone can enable me to share my screen.
Denise or Andre, can you enable Willem to share his screen? We'll just be back in a second. I think we're just sorting out some technical issues.
It's a model that is restoring landscape at a large scale. Conservation is super important. It's probably the most important we can do at this moment in the world to maintain and protect the biodiversity. As you know, we are in the biggest crisis ever after man came up, and that is the biodiversity crisis. The climate crisis is just a part of the larger crisis, which is the biodiversity or ecosystem crisis. And that is all about our well-being and food production and whatever you name it. So our economy basically is driving ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss over the last decades and over the last 200 years, but especially over the last decades. The whole economy was fueling biodiversity extinction. The beauty is that we can do something about it, and maybe we can even do much more about it than the climate crisis. We can restore those ecosystems. We can restore biodiversity in a very fast way. But you need to understand what the systemic approach of it is, because there are living a lot of people within those landscapes. So what I did is 7-8 years ago, when I left my former job as IUCN director in the Netherlands, I visited farmers and investors worldwide in many places, including your place in India, your country, and interviewed farmers and investors, and basically asked them two questions: what is your biggest frustration, and what is your hope? What is your dream? And the farmers said, my biggest frustration is that people are leaving the countryside and that the countryside becomes depleted due to all these impacts from externals. And for investors, the biggest frustration was that they couldn't find pipeline. There was no pipeline. There was a lot of pipeline in doing things less bad, but there's no pipeline in doing things good from a sustainability and biodiversity perspective. And that's when I realized that the whole economic model at landscapes is maximization of return on investment per hectare. And this leads always to degradation, deforestation, biodiversity loss, pollution, you name it, all those nasty things, you know, the burning of the Amazon forest or the Siberia forest or whatever. And I thought, let's turn that into a new model that is practical, systemic, and workable. And there are actually 4 losses that you can find within a landscape. The first loss is a loss of biodiversity. The second loss is a loss of economic activity. The third loss is, of course, a loss of financial income, because when you move jobs, finance will be lost. But I realized that the most important loss in the rural countryside was a loss of hope. People left the place. People lost their pride. So I turned that into a model of 4 returns. Each landscape, if you want to restore a landscape, you need to return inspiration. You need to return economic activity, jobs. You need to return biodiversity, and that will give a return of sustainable finance. And those 4 returns can only work if you divide that within a landscape scale. So I moved to the landscape and said, okay, each landscape should be divided into a 3-zone approach: a natural zone, a protected area zone, and of course a city or let's say an economic zone where you have economic activities. But the in-between zone should be a combined zone of increasing biodiversity and increasing productivity. And within the 3-zone approach, everything should fit within that 3-zone approach or landscape approach during a minimum time frame of 20 years. So investors, farmers, conservationists should think and act, as well as governments, in a time frame of at least 20 years, but preferably longer, because ecology will not work for you if you don't have a good time frame. And that model of 4 returns delivered by a 3-zone approach at landscape level during a minimum time frame of 20 years, I wrote it down, published it, peer-reviewed it at university level, etc., and started doing it in several countries. And now we're working in 8 countries, in Spain, in areas larger than 100,000 hectares, quite often larger than 500,000 hectares. In Spain, we work in 1 million hectares area. In Australia, 300,000 hectares. In South Africa, 500,000 hectares. And we just recently also started in Kenya, in Zambia, in India, in Haiti, Germany. So in many places, we are rolling out this new way of landscape restoration. And so far, it's working. The people understand it, farmers understand it. So it's all about, do stakeholders get this? And yes, they get it. After 7 years, we now can say, yes, they get it. And of course, we then prepare these kind of landscapes for all kind of new innovative businesses. And that's where startups will come in. And that's where we need innovative thinkers and doers to make sure that we all work together towards restoring ecosystems business-wise, but with a different economic model. And that's basically our story. I've had 3 slides, but I can't find them. Maybe I'll try again, but I think that's it.
Yeah, I think you have permission now, I think.
Yes?
Yeah.
It's disabled still. I can't share them.
Disabled?
I feel very disabled, but don't worry.
Yeah, okay. I'll just speak to Andre.
Yeah. If there are only some pictures that will give you an impression of what I just said with some slides.
All right, while we wait for your screen slide permission, let me ask you a few questions.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the future of farming. Are we going to see giant vertical farms in the future, and then we can leave the landscape alone and not cut down any more trees for farming?
No. I believe in some. Yeah, of course we will see that, and we will see innovative things in vertical farming, but it will definitely not replace farming systems on the ground. I think farming is important if we do it well. We can and we cannot wait until the whole world is covered with rainforest or old-growth forest. It will take hundreds of years. We need to think our time frame is very limited, and we see that every time. I can buy an iPhone every 4-6 months, and I've got a new model. And planting trees is a hype, and it's easy. I can plant 100 trees a day, but I cannot get trees mature for the coming 100 to 200 or 300 years. That is a real profession. That takes time. That we call it forestry. We call it conservation. So I think vertical is super important. It will grow, and definitely it will grow because it will be more sustainable and more economic. But we also need small growth, a lot of small farmers that maintain and increase biodiversity and productivity, and that combination is possible. We call it regenerative agriculture or regenerative agroforestry systems. So basically, use the knowledge of ecology to produce sustainable without chemicals or with less chemicals, but mostly you can do it without chemicals. Permaculture is very much into this, and we can learn from permaculture to use that kind of technology. So it's a combination, that's what I think. But definitely we need to put the finance system, we need to work on the finance system. Finance should work to conserve our protected areas. Now we can't even pay guards to protect our forests, not in India, not in the Netherlands, not in the US, not in Congo. Never, it's just, we see it as a kind of hobby, but it's the most important thing of the world we need to do. So finance should be innovate. We should innovate finance and think about multiple returns instead of only financial returns in a very short time frame for some some shareholders in New York or Mumbai or Frankfurt.
Willem, there's a contradiction in what you're saying. You're saying that we need to have a time frame of 20 years to
minimum 20 years,
right?
Yeah.
Politicians usually are in power for 4 to 5 years, and businesses want returns in 1 year, and so do shareholders. How do you reconcile 20 years on one hand with politicians who make policies for 4 years or 8 years at one time?
Yeah, you're so true. I mean, what you said is, of course, completely true. That's our struggle. This is about consciousness. If we don't find the consciousness, and we need to work towards consciousness, the time frame of 4 to 5 years will work for a lot of products, but it will not work for these kind of products. So we need to make a switch between, let's say, an iPhone or a car and the production of a landscape. That is just a complete different world. And we need to make a shift in, let's say, our economic and finance systems to work on that. And politically, politicians need to understand that. So it's our responsibility to create that awareness. And we try to do that also because what we've seen so far is that if you talk about nature and go to nature, people get moved. So it touches something within their own system. It is going deeper. It's going to the soul, you could say. So the connection between soil and soul should be worked on. And that is, of course, sounds vague, but is actually the essence of our work. We just show it by doing it. But it's true. Yeah, we are not, our whole silo system is based on fastness, effectiveness, efficiency, and efficiency in nature is something else than efficiency in industrial processes.
And the kind of farming that you're talking about, does it apply to, for instance, the huge mechanized farms in America, or the small land holdings, say 1 hectare, 2 hectares, even smaller than that in Africa and India?
Yeah.
But how does it apply to both ends of the spectrum of farming?
Yes, we see the same thing in Australia, of course. Australia, United States, you have those huge farms. I very much believe in smallholders, but smallholders need to work together or based on a landscape vision. So basically what they need to work on is that they should not see themselves only as an a farmer. They also are landscape builders or landscape caretakers. And they need to be honored, and they need to get their funding also from that perspective. And I very much believe in the carbon world, or carbon pricing that can help in this from this perspective. If we can combine ecological science and carbon pricing, I think we can help those smallholders to get a better earning and to take care of water, carbon, biodiversity, and production. And that is, I think, the combination where we need to go to, that we need to look into.
All right. So, William, do you remain an optimist or a pessimist about the future?
This is that's a tricky question. Thanks for asking. If I look to what happens, science, and I'm pretty aware of all the things that are going on. might tend to be a pessimist, but because I know I'm a trained tropical ecologist, so from an ecological perspective, I know how flexible or how persuasive nature is. Nature can solve these things, but we need to work with nature. So it's something in our brain between our ears that we need to switch on, that we can work with nature, and nature is not anymore an enemy that it might have been, 2,000-3,000 years ago. We are able to turn this switch in our head on and make sure that we can create this beautiful earth, in a better condition. So I'm optimistic with the next generation. I'm pessimistic with, let's say, the older generation that was there only, that had this mentality of maximization of return on investment per hectare. I think we need to switch to a maximization of 4 returns per hectare economic model, and then I'm super optimistic actually. Never in my age, I'm now turning 6. I'm getting pretty old, of course, like we all do. But when I started studying ecology, no one from the business world or the finance world asked me any question. They thought actually that they were, ecologists were crazy people. But now ecology is entering mainstream, and that really makes me optimistic.
Okay, that's a good answer. You're both optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. My last question to you, Willem. You said the restoration of hope or inspiration is the first step to restoring a landscape. How do you restore hope and inspiration?
Yes, it's definitely the first step, because in all those landscapes, people are living there. So we need to bring people together. So what we do, we bring them together within and we use a certain methodology called Theory U. It's a kind of stakeholder management tool, and it really works well. You can Google it. It's very common, and that gives people the opportunity to share their thoughts and their vision from their experiences and their families and whatever, how they see a landscape blossoming, let's say, in the coming decades, and that gives so much power to and bring pride and hope back, that when you guide them with the right tool setting, they can actually do things in a very fast way. And we've seen that. We've seen it in Spain. We've seen it in Africa, in several places. We've seen it in Holland, because we also work in the Netherlands. So it's not a poor, rich country stuff or whatever. It's just about people. It's everywhere the same. If you guide them with a vision and an action plan underneath, which you can, with M&E stuff underneath, monitoring, evaluation, all the things are there, then you use that energy that every person had inside in the heart to make the heart connection to the, let's say, the action connection. And that's what we do. And it is amazing how fast this sometimes go. I give an example. In Spain, we started in 2014. It's the most porous part in Spain, dry, dehydrated, eroded countryside. Within 6 months, farmers organized themselves, and now there are 300 farmers in a cooperative. We started companies, investors came on board, but that in the first 6 months something happened, something magic happened, by giving them the right tool setting, but we started with the heart, not with the brain, and I think that but we had the tool setting with the brain and the hands ready, of course. So it's a people stuff. It's always like, you know how it works. You start with people, and then robots come later.
Start with the heart and then end with the head. Willem Ferreira, thank you for talking to me.
Most welcome. Bye-bye.
Right, another quick reminder to our audience that if you have questions you'd like to ask our panelists, please use the Q&A function. Do send us your questions and we'll pose them to the panelists. Our next speaker is Arnaud de la Tour, CEO and co-founder of Hello Tomorrow. Arnaud de la Tour is CEO and co-founder. Prior to that, he completed a PhD in the photovoltaic industry and then spent some time at the Boston Consulting Group. Arnaud, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for the introduction and thank you for welcoming me. And I'm very happy to be back at ClimateLaunchpad.
Yeah, happy to have you back.
Thank you. So I'm gonna try to be quick and talk a little bit about Hello Tomorrow, but more interestingly maybe about what we see around clean tech and what's the role of emerging technologies that we also call deep tech, and hopefully give a few helpful recommendations. So Hello Tomorrow, it's So I'm the CEO of Hello Tomorrow, indeed, and Hello Tomorrow is we could call it a community-based accelerator. That's how I would present it, especially talking to startups. So why community-based? So first, it's an accelerator because I know that we work on what is the most important to accelerate startups, and here I'm gonna share my screen if I can. So we for now I can't, but basically we work on fundings, we work on access to markets, which are the most important aspects for startups. Yes.
Is it trying to help you share your screen?
For now, the host has disabled participant screen sharing, so I'm not able to share it. But if not, it's okay. It's not a problem. I can. If I can, it's good. But if I can't, it's okay. So for now, I'm going to continue. So we provide fundings, but not by investing directly. We give an access to a large network of.
Just hold on for a second. Hi, can you mute yourself?
Yes.
One second. Not you, Arnaud. Somebody else is speaking. Let's fix it.
You want me to keep speaking or?
Yes.
Yilles praten.
Yilles, Denise, can you mute yourself? Yilles, Denise, can you mute yourself?
So
just give me a second, Arnaud.
Yeah, no problem. Let's do a small pause.
Sorry, this is part of the tech problems in doing all of this remote.
I know we are doing our big event with thousands of people online in November. So,
all right, back to you, Arnaud. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. But I'm still not able to share my screen. By the way, I think you, the host, so maybe you disabled the screen sharing.
I don't have the rights to disable you, but the hosts are in The Hague. I'm based in India. I'm just talking to them to try and get you to screen share.
Okay, if not, it's okay. So again, we are a community-based accelerator. So accelerator because we accelerate access to markets by providing access to potential customers and industrial partners. We also accelerate fundraising by providing access to VCs and investors. And we also provide visibility through the events we organized and access to journalists. But we call that community-based because we are not kind of the classical accelerator because we do a little bit of coaching, not much, because we support large number of startups, more than 500 a year. So we foster rather peer learning than top-down coaching. We don't invest ourselves. We rather connect to external investors that would be more relevant for the startups than our own team. And it's not a time-boxed program because we think it's not relevant for emerging technology startups because they need more than a few months to really benefit from our community, what we can provide. And it would be also pointless to do something only internal because we are interdisciplinary and there is no way we have all the expertise and mentors internally. So we prefer to be like more community-based. And more concretely, the way to take part to this kind of community-based accelerator is to apply to become a deep tech pioneer, so kind of a member of it. So then I wanted to maybe to talk about how Hello Tomorrow relates to ClimateLaunchpad and start by sorry, I'm not able to share it, but there is an interesting graph in the IEA report 2020 called Energy Technology Perspectives. We see that to remove carbon from the atmosphere and to reduce our emissions as much as we need to do according to the ambitions we have at national, European, or worldwide level. Of course, we will need to use mature technologies, kind of the low-hanging fruits, but this will be only a small part of the solution. And we will need other solutions that are today in early adoptions, but even only in demonstration or prototype phase. So we need innovations, we need new products, new services, and we need new technologies to fuel them. So that's really, I think, at the core of ClimateLaunchpad, but also at the core of Hello Tomorrow, the fact that we need to change the way we consume, but also the way we produce. So the very infrastructure of our industries, and to do so, we need breakthrough technologies to reach maturity level sufficient to have a real impact. And that's what we want to accelerate. That's what I think also that's what make our mission with ClimateLaunchpad really aligned. And also the good thing, we saw that working in the past years is that there is a good complementarity between Hello Tomorrow and ClimateLaunchpad, because ClimateLaunchpad is doing an amazing job at helping teams go from an idea to something more in a shape of a business model that can convince potential investors or partners. And Hello Tomorrow is the community that also provides us contacts with investors and industrial partners. But it's very great. It's great that ClimateLaunchpad does this job of helping companies really frame their project into something that can convince other people. And I think then that might be the end of my little speech. This is very important, this aspect of being able to convince other people, because we see at Hello Tomorrow, but also at ClimateLaunchpad, maybe for different reasons, companies that don't put themselves in the shoes of potential customers. We see that within Hello Tomorrow because we have a lot of people at Hello Tomorrow that come from university labs, from academia. There are university spin-offs, and they are in love with their technology. They think their technology is so great that everybody would want to buy it, but it's not like that. It's not how the business world works. And maybe for more like clean tech and ClimateLaunchpad projects, maybe the bias would be more that there is a big focus on climate impact. And maybe some might think that if there is a huge climate impact, it will be sufficient to go in the market and have clients. But it's also not the case. And it's true that for B2C, some customers might want to pay a premium for green products. In B2B, you might have hypothesis of CO2 price. But the effect would be in the end always somehow marginal, and your product, your business should be profitable and should be competitive with. The best is to be competitive with like not sustainable alternatives. Then there is no debate. But of course, it's not always possible. But really, that's my first advice. Keep the business aspect in mind, because in the end, if you don't have a business model that is competitive, then your product won't reach the market and you won't have any impact at all. So this is actually more important, the business model, than the climate impact itself, even if it's in the end to have a climate impact. How to do so? I think it's first, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So really find something you fix for a potential customer, and then really focus on this. And maybe the solution you had in mind is not exactly the right one, so you will pivot, as we say in the startup slang. But really, you need to have in mind and in sight the problem you want to fix. And then talk to potential customers. They will confirm whether it's the right one or not. And also adopt a design to cost approach, meaning that have the cost of your product or your service in mind from the very beginning of designing the product, in the very earliest conception phases, because otherwise, if you find out later that the cost is not right, it might be too late to change it. So have that in mind at the very first step. And maybe the last advice is so the second one is surround yourself with people that are better than you, because in the end, that's especially if you are the CEO, that's what you need to be good at. Find out where you need people better than you, and be able to recruit them, attract them, and talk to as many people as possible. Some might sometimes think that it's their project, and other people might steal it, but it's not going to happen. But when you talk to people, they help you improve your project. So it's really important. But if you are here, it's because you're already in this mindset. So I wouldn't be too worried about that.
Thank you, Arnold. Let me start off with a couple of questions. What are the most promising new technologies for energy for the future? Will it be solar? Will it be hydrogen? Will it be fusion? Will it be fuel cell? From where you sit, what do you think are the most exciting possibilities?
Most exciting and most promising might not be the same. I think if we consider fusion, that's very exciting, but it's like talking about quantum computing. You don't really know if it's gonna ever really be something that is real and that is actually on the market, even though it's already working in a kind of prototype mode, even in startups. So for me, this is really exciting, for sure. This could change the way we consider energy, being really abundant, carbon neutral, and maybe with less drawbacks than nuclear. But I think hydrogen has a huge potential as well, and it's closer to the market. It's been decades that it's been working actually. Now we are just trying to reduce the cost so that it's competitive with alternatives. It's already competitive for some niche applications, like it was for solar when it started with satellites, and with all the progress made in nanomaterials for hydrolyze, for hydrolyze, to break hydrogen, to break water into hydrogen, and I think we might have green hydrogen as a competitive price. Maybe not tomorrow, but this is definitely achievable, and it's not just a matter of investing enough. So I think it's very promising, hydrogen, and it can change the whole energy infrastructure, storage, transportation, and replace traditional fuel in the end, even for planes maybe. And it can work where maybe sometimes batteries cannot really work. Solar, for me, it's a bit more traditional already. We are already kind of down the learning curve at a price that is almost cost competitive, and it's part of the energy mix of any country. There is more or less solar depending on the if there is wind, if there is sun, if there is other. So it's going to grow in the mix, but it's more already here, I would say.
Right. So here's a question: what's holding battery technology back? We've seen solar grow and it's competitive and it can compete with traditional forms of energy, but energy storage still is a big problem, isn't it? What is the future of energy storage?
There are several problems. Well, first, maybe the first one is that there is a growing need of energy storage, because it's well known that with a lot of renewable that are intermittent, we need to store energy when it's produced to be able to use it when there is no wind, no sun. So there is a growing need of energy storage. Before, it was maybe not so much an issue when we didn't have that much renewable energies. And there is maybe another issue of energy storage. It's for transportation, because for now we store energy in our car, fueling the tanks with gasoline. But if we want to switch to move away from this kind of energy source, then we need to find something that is has energy that has the energy density of this of this, and it's quite hard to achieve that with batteries, even though it's progress are made. And there is hydrogen also with different hurdles, but that are being that are being solved. So I would say that for energy storage, for more like the whole energy system and compensating for energy, renewable energy is more finding solutions that are cost competitive. So here we are more thinking of storing energy like kinetic energy, or maybe storing like compressed air, maybe batteries. But for now we didn't reach the cost competitive price to store energy at a massive scale. And for energy storage for mobility, we have electric cars already. We have hydrogen cars based on hydrogen energy. It's still way more expensive than traditional cars, so there is still progress to be made. But I think that many countries are investing in are having like policies to boost the market, to drive down the cost because of the learning curve. Exactly what happened in solar, where when 20 years ago, Germany, Japan, the US, they started to have massive feed-in tariffs to boost the solar market. Yeah.
All right. That was very informative, Arnaud Dilator. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please enjoy the rest of the grand finals at Climate Launchpad.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, and talk to you soon.
All right, viewers, with that, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back with you in exactly 5 minutes.
And we're offline.
Okay. Noted that, Denise.
Suresh, could you please turn on your video?
Sorry.
Can you turn on your webcam, please?
Suresh, could you please mute yourself all the time from now? So stay muted.
Stay muted.
Indy, could you please turn your camera on, and after that share your screen with Suresh? If you guys stay muted, nobody can see you live, so that's perfect. Indy, could you please left the room now? Thank you. Suresh, everything is now fine. They're gonna cue you here when we go live, and you can unmute yourself, and then Indy's gonna be in your room. Sorry for the inconvenient. Okay, Suresh, we go live in 5, 4, 3.
All right, welcome back to the global grand finals of the Climate Launchpad. Let me make a quick announcement before we go on to tell you what's coming up next in today's program. So at 12:30, what's next is a life after startup competition with Ron Blomers. He's a Climate Launchpad trainer, founder, and managing partner of Start You Up. It's a session filled with anecdotes, insights, and some painful lessons that have been learnt along the way. If I were you, I would let these experienced trainers help you avoid common entrepreneurial pitfalls and share a laugh about the hurdles that you've already cleared. At 12:30 p.m. and 1 p.m., which is CEST time, Things I Wish I Knew with Climate Launchpad trainers. It's a session, like I said, filled with anecdotes and painful lessons learned. So sign up for that on the website. With that, we continue with our program. Our next speaker is Indy Johar. Indy is the co-founder of Dark Matter Labs and Senior Innovation Associate at Young Foundation. Now, Indy is an architect who takes inspiration from quantum physics on one side and ancient Sikh philosophy to design what he calls a post-ownership society with his organization. Indy is currently working on a new book focused on case studying business models for public good. Please welcome Indy Johar. Indy, can we have you in the room? You'll be joining us in just a few seconds. And for those of you who missed it earlier, please do send us your questions using the Q&A function for our panelists. As soon as the panelist is finished with his or her talk. Indy, can we request you to switch on your camera? Please send us your questions using the Q&A function. As soon as the presentation by the speaker is over, we will pose your questions to the presenter. Hi, welcome. A few false starts there, but here we are.
Not at all. Delighted to be here.
Okay. Indy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Firstly, delighted to be here. I know this is it's a very short conversation, but I think it's worth having. I suppose what I want to present today is kind of the scale of the challenge that we face. Often startups are predicated on the thesis of how we do change, and I would say the kind of scale of change necessary is unprecedented. And I think our model of doing change is going to be dramatically transformed. So I think there's a new ask from how we are doing value creation, which is fundamental. So I'm going to present a few thoughts. My name is Indy Johar from Dark Matter Labs. We're based in Holland, but have a footprint from Seoul to Montreal. And I'm going to not spend too much time talking about myself, but actually what I think the challenge is. So I'm going to just share a screen, which should hopefully you can see that. Is that coming through?
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Fantastic. So I want to put this kind of conversation that we often talk about startups, but actually miss the kind of macro social context we're in. It's just worth recognizing we've got over 1 million people have passed away as a result of COVID. We should not forget, actually, they're close to many, many more severely affected who are going to be long-term impacted. And then you put that into the context of kind of the economic impact that we're about to face, where many government borrowing is massively shot up, with recessions expected at the kind of 300-year, worst recession in 300 years expected in the UK, for example. And at the same time, social inequalities are going up. So if we want to talk about a product market fit, we have to understand the nature of the market in society has dramatically been transformed over the last 10 years. And the thesis of change is not going to be as simple or as direct as linear as we thought. And I think it's worth recognizing that. At the same time, when you look at the kind of persistent nature of the crisis, I think we're going to face, we've got lots of psychological trauma that's already manifest in terms of the isolation issues that happened, the overcrowding in people's households, the domestic violence, the kind of whole section of issues that are manifest. The mental illnesses and support, the economic injury as a result of burnout. So I think it's really critical for startups and kind of new innovators, and I don't even want to talk about startups, innovators to understand the market and society to which this transformation is required has fundamentally changed. At the same time, it's really critical that we think beyond our current system. Right. I don't know how many of you know the scale. This is a scale that was developed in the 1960s, Cartesian scale, which really talks about the scale of civilizations. So in the current rate, where a scale 1 civilization is able to harness the energy of a planet, scale 2, a solar system, scale 3, a galaxy, and scale 4, a cluster of galaxies, and it goes on. The point of this is to actually also put into play actually our ability to think radically big and over a much longer timescale than we're used to. So currently the human civilization is about 0.7 civilization. And our capability to actually go to one civilization might have a very key threshold in our ability to go from competition to complex collaboration capacities at a civilization scale. So what is the macro trajectory that we're into? What is the micro trajectory that we're into? At the same time, it's worth understanding deep context. So I think it's very clear since the 15th to 16th century, we've moved from one relationship to the world, which has been object-oriented relationship in a relatively infinite world, or a perceptibly infinite world from a colonial perspective, to a world view which is massively about interdependence. And fundamentally, in all the work that we're seeing is a foundational relationship with humans, with our environment, with the future, and nature is fundamentally changing in things. So self-sovereign things that many of you hopefully are working on is actually a foundational transformation in our relationship to ownership, to cognizant capabilities, or to nature. We're seeing many interesting work, quite a lot of interesting work going on about how we make rivers self-sovereign. So this is a foundational transformation in our relationship, and I think we're looking at the capabilities and institutions to build that. What does that worldview, what does that transformation worldview start to do, and what opportunities does it drive on the table? Next, complexity. Actually, when you're operating in much of the world that we're operating in, we're operating in a world of complexity and emergence, in this context, actually our ability to create decentralized capacity for innovation is going to be fundamental. So it's no longer about the management suite innovating, it's about your decentralized capacity to innovate in complex emergent situations. What is the organizational form to do that? What is the organizational collaborations to do that? What is the complex collaboration required to achieve some of these realities? So if you're talking about driving outcomes, it's very clear no single magical bullet will be able to do that. But your ability to build the movements for those change is going to be vital. That's going to require new forms of leadership, which is absolutely fundamental. And that's going to require portfolio work. This is our own internal portfolio work, which we're working a lot with Climate-KIC on this stuff. And it's really clear that when you start to look at a whole portfolio transformation, you start to say, where are you organizing demand? Where are you organizing supply? How are you investing in the narrative construction? It is at the management of that portfolio is what you're driving in the organizational transformation from. And this requires new business models that none of us are used to. So we've been doing a lot of work about radical business models around what we call civic business models, which is about many-to-many transaction business models. How do you start to construct them? How do you construct value in really radical different ways into that future? So I just want to set this context because I think for European startups to really make change, we're going to have to start to think about the future in radically different ways and be able to see that future. And I think that has massive implications of both how we organize, how we finance, how we invest, but also how we perceive the future and perceive the kind of nature of the threat and opportunity that we're in. So, and I think this is about a different type of reality, about a new form of fundamentals. And many of these things that I've got listed here, which is about beyond control futures, I think our thesis of the world is around control. How do we go beyond the thesis of control? How do we talk about humans plus reality in a kind of hybrid reality situations? Spatial computing, what does that do to distributed self-sovereignty of our environment, of non-economic actors? How do we think about systems organizing? How do we build augmented self-governance, public interest governance models at the micro level? How do you build the machined economies of tomorrow? These things are going to come together to create some of these futures, and they're fundamental to be able to drive that. So I'm going to end here. I think whilst we face a massive challenge, we have extraordinary capacity to be able to do stuff, but it does require us to break out of the stranglehold of what I would call 1990s product thinking from Silicon Valley and really embrace a kind of radical transformative capacity. With that, I'm going to call it a day. Hopefully I was not too late. You guys can all get me here. I'll just put this up here, but I will flip back to our conversation.
Thank you, Indy. That was quite a power-packed presentation. Lots of information, lots of things to absorb. My first question is about what's behind you, actually. You have a sign from the movie Arrival, the heptapod language. What in that language, what is the sign behind you saying?
Well, I mean, what I love about the language and what I love about that movie is that it challenges the notion of how we perceive the world, and how we construct language is how we make the world. So the kind of our perception is forming reality, and in many quantum physics theses, that sort of reality is often being discussed. So it is inevitably true. The language we use, the perceptions that we construct, are actually informing what we think is plausible. And we need to give ourselves the patience to be able to construct new language to see new possibilities. And one of our problems is that our language is all constructed and adopted through a very poor uptake of what I would call Silicon Valley ripoffs. We need to genuinely construct a language which is responsible to the scale of the problem that we're seeing, and also recognizing object-oriented models of thinking are no longer the way forward. We are not going to be in an object-oriented mode. English language has 80% of it is nouns. We need to be thinking in a completely different way, and that's going to open up some of those challenges. So your ability to control the taxonomy of your organization and build new comprehension is fundamental to actually building distributed, decentralized capacity for innovation. Sorry, I'm packing stuff in, but thank you for that question.
But Indy, many experts are saying the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is going to be worse than the effect of both world wars combined. Would you agree?
I can't say that. I mean, if you look at the numbers of deaths in World War II, that would be inhumane and not responsible. I think it will be different. I wouldn't want to make that sort of comparison just out of moral respect for. The deaths in World War II and one were extraordinary, and just because I suppose many of us don't remember it, I would not make that claim. But I would say it is a signal. I would say, so for me, COVID is just an example of a global trigger. The problem is not COVID. The problem is systemically the vulnerabilities in our global system have been highlighted by COVID. And the hyper efficiencies that we've generated have created fragile, taut command and control systems, which are not able to deal with complexity. And I think this is a trigger that's inviting us to think fundamentally differently in terms of relevance. Just to give you an example, I was with an assistant minister in Pakistan who turned around and said, bailouts. He said, bailouts, Indy? Bailouts are my new normal. I've done 3 of them in the last 10 years. So we are talking about a fundamentally different type of relationship between state and private sector. I think we're talking about, and the idea, is there a private sector in a complex world? Or is it just a public sector, which is different forms of independence and sovereignty? I think we have a conception problem into the worldview that we're creating forward. So I would argue, yes, it's massive, but it's just making visible the issues on the ground rather than it being the source of the problems. I think it's made manifest the risks that we were accruing, and it's just a beginning of a story. This is nothing compared to what the shocks and risks that we're likely to face as a civilization. And I think what's critical is even climate change is just a symptom. This is a really fundamental point. Climate change is a symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. The problem is human capacities to create huge amounts of externalities which are unpriced, uncosted, and ungoverned in the system. And that reality is self-terminating us. So I think we have to start to think through that system scale, which I think is really critical.
Can you tell us what's common to quantum physics and ancient Sikh philosophy?
I'm neither brilliant at both, so I wouldn't want to be. I find and I'm like I say, I do not claim to be either the most important Sikh philosopher nor a brilliant quantum physicist, but I think there is something interesting about the thesis of entanglement and the idea of kind of wholeness and unity, which means that the kind of space-time separation that we perceive is just a momentary manifestation. But what's actually at a quantum level, everything is entangled. So there's something interesting about how we've constructed a worldview which is probably discontinuous with the underlying physics of how the world is being constructed. And I think that discrepancy is really interesting for me. I do think that our worldview, which is constructed out of a Newtonian physics thesis, is coming to an end. And I think there is a different worldview which is actually more closely correlated to the quantum physics. And I would say many religions, I wouldn't want to put Sikhism in any privileged place on this. I think many religions have been philosophically thinking through that other domain as well. So I think it's at the cross relation of those things is something powerful.
And what can we expect from your book when it comes out?
We'll see. I think the book is less relevant than actually some of the products we're building, and they'll be interesting. I think new ways of financing. If you're going to talk about this sort of change, we should be talking about new ways of financing complex change. If we're talking about new ways of actually building this change, we have to talk about new models of governance and new models of contracting. Those things, the kind of boring matter, the dark matter, the boring revolution, as I call it, is fundamental to making the transformation. And that requires a new model of and it also requires a new model of human development, which people like Thomas Bjorkman and the Nordic Secret talk about very eloquently. And for me, that's a real foundation for the transformation that's required. And that's how we can think about it.
Indeed, Joel, thank you very much for talking to us.
My sincere pleasure, and thank you for your lovely questions. I really appreciate them.
Enjoy the rest of Climate Launchpad.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Indijor of Dark Matter. Here's another quick announcement at 12 p.m. CST. Deal Stream with deals over 1 million euros. You can watch 4 Climate Launchpad alumni pitch in front of Lucy Rands. She's a Series A investor at the Environment Technology Fund. All right, we continue with our conversations as part of the global finals of the Climate Launchpad. Our next speaker is Dolf Gillen. He's a Director, Innovation and Technology at the International Renewable Energy Agency since 2011. Dolf's work focuses on power systems, innovation for, for the integration of renewables, sector coupling, and energy transition strategies. Dolf has a PhD from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Dolf Gillen, welcome to the show. We'll just give Dolf a second to get his audio and video going. And for those of you in the audience, like I said before, if you're joining us just now, please send us your questions using the Q&A function. Welcome, Dolf.
Thank you, Serge.
All right, Dolf, what you do sounds very technical and very fascinating. Tell us more about what you do.
Yeah, thank you very much. IRENA is an international renewable energy agency. We have countries as members, ranging from the size of China to small island nations. And they want to accelerate the deployment of renewables. And innovation and technology is a core part of that. And I think it's also generally recognized that the private sector and entrepreneurship is critical in accelerating that deployment. So climate change is clearly become a top priority in many countries. So we see that more and more countries are subscribing to net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 or 2060. Europe is on this path, and China just announced it last week. And energy transition is really critical to achieve that. And that has a few components. First of all, we need to use energy more efficiently, but also we need to replace polluting fossil energy with clean energy. And we see renewables as a key part of that solution. So according to our scenarios, we need to grow the share of renewables in final energy use from around 20% today to around 67% by 2050. And that has two components. There is the power sector and there is the end-use sector, so building, industry, and transport. So looking at the power sector, we see that renewable power generation is replacing fossil power generation. At the moment, globally, we're at about 28% renewables, and that's rising by about a percentage point a year. And some countries are already much higher. For example, if you look at Europe, so in the year to date, the share of renewables was 41% in electricity generation. Rapid innovation continues in renewable generation. For example, in solar, we see that there's now a trend to perovskite silicon tandem cells with much higher efficiency. We see that wind turbine size continues to increase. We have now wind turbines with blades of more than 100 meters length, which has specific engineering challenges, etc. But the main challenge in power systems transition at the moment is flexibility. So how to integrate high shares of variable solar and wind. And to do that, we need technology, but we also need innovative market design and regulation. We need different types of system operation and new business models. So there's a range of flexibility options. We have identified 30 categories, it's a little bit beyond this intro to go into great detail there, but we see that there is a lot happening in the area of, for example, smart grids. So the role of aggregators that sell energy services, system services based on behind-the-meter batteries or behind-the-meter PV systems. We see the use of smart meters rapidly increasing that provide price signals that reflect scarcity, or peer-to-peer trading. And there's a lot happening in households, but for example, also a different operation of aluminium smelters that is much more flexible. So that is an area of very rapid innovation at the moment, and there we see an important role for startups. Now, the second part of that transition is decarbonizing energy, the end-use sectors, so buildings, industry, and transport, that is just taking shape now. And their electrification with renewables and use of green hydrogen play a key role. At the moment, you see rapid progress in electromobility, for example. This year, around 5% of all cars sold worldwide will be electric. And you see now also increasing attention for what we call hard to decarbonize sectors. So iron and steel, chemical, petrochemical, aviation, shipping, etc. And that's sectors where, for example, green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity through water electrolysis is taking shape. Batteries are critical for this overall transition. We see a rapid ramp up of new battery manufacturing capacity. You see also that there is a lot of work on battery chemistry to enhance the performance, and also other forms of electricity storage are progressing. So in summary, we see rapid innovation, but we will need a lot more innovation over the next 10 to 20 years to make this energy transition a success. There's an important role for entrepreneurs in that, and there are important synergies between energy transition and digitalization. That is a sweet spot where we see a lot of innovation happening. Of course, overcoming the valley of death and between proof of concept and widespread deployment is critical, as it is in any innovation area. And we also argue that the COVID recovery packages should be used as an opportunity for this transition, and there should also be an important innovation and invention component in this to support startups to accelerate energy transition. So we need the resources, the capacities of those on this call to make this transition vision into a reality.
Thank you, Dolph. Let me ask you a few questions while we wait for audience questions to come in. My first question for you is, countries like India and Africa are going to need a lot of energy in the next 50 years to pull people out of poverty. And much of this energy is going to come from not clean energy. It's going to come from coal and fossil fuels. How would you, what approach would you advocate for developing countries, especially India and Africa?
Yeah, well, we are not so sure that a lot of that will come from coal. I mean, if you look at the latest India plans, it's very ambitious on renewables. We've done new analysis for the Southern and Eastern African power pools, and we find that the current master plans, it's true, they have like 170 gigawatts of new coal in there, but according to our analysis, it's at the moment, it would be much cheaper and much more economically viable to invest in renewables, because the cost of renewables have come down so dramatically. There is still an issue with that a lot of decision making is based on outdated information. This is a very rapidly innovating sector, and also there is a need to create the right enabling frameworks. So the time of subsidies for coal-based power generation, that should stop.
Okay. We hear a lot I'm based in Mumbai in India. We hear a lot about solar and wind, apart from the old renewables, of course, hydro. We don't hear enough about hydrogen. What's happening in the world of hydrogen?
So hydrogen, of course, is not a primary energy source. You cannot mine hydrogen. You have to produce hydrogen. There is a lot of hydrogen production at the moment worldwide, around 130 million tons per year. But that is what we call gray hydrogen, so from coal and gas without CO2 capture. Now, attention is shifting to blue hydrogen, especially natural gas with CO2 capture and storage, and green hydrogen, so from electrolysis. And for example, in Europe now, there are very ambitious plans for green hydrogen. So European Commission announced a plan for 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030 in Europe, and another 40 gigawatts in neighboring countries. Germany wants to install 5 gigawatts by 2030, but by that time import 80% of its hydrogen. So also a lot of attention now for developing trade in green hydrogen from countries with good renewable resources, and related to that, issues around standards and certification that it's really clean and green hydrogen that's being traded. So a very interesting and hot topic at the moment.
All right. We have a question from Manquel. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Manquel. Manquel asks, how do you see energy savings from 3D printing technology, especially in the construction sector?
Well, we need all efficiency that we can get. There is a lot of hidden energy, of sunk energy in building materials. So if new building technologies can help to increase to reduce the consumption of building materials, and that is a very important contribution. If such technology can at the same time help to increase the energy performance of new buildings, that is also very welcome. So in that context, I can see a role perhaps also for 3D printing.
Another question comes from Jürgen Lorenz from the Philippines. He, or I think it's a he, asks why only 67% direct renewable energy could reach more than 80%, and together with green hydrogen, 100%. He goes on to say that today's available technology is able to do this at a lower cost than proceeding with fossil fuels. So can renewable energies actually compete with fossil fuels in terms of energy density, in terms of calorific value and other parameters, and compete head on?
Again, you have to look a little bit across different applications. So in the power sector, I would agree that we can get the systems with 100% renewables in the next 20, 30 years. In end-use sectors, it depends a little bit. So you have these hard to decarbonize sectors. If you take the example of aviation, so today all aviation fuel is kerosene. It's an oil product. Technically, it's possible to use biofuels, but you would need a lot of biofuels just for the aviation sector. So there you can run into issues. That there is now. So last week there was an announcement from Airbus. They want to develop now hydrogen airplanes, but of course you need 20 years to develop these airplanes, and then you need another 30 years to replace the whole fleet. So longer term, yes, but till 2050 we really need to speed up if we want to get to these levels.
Dolph, you spoke about the valley of death between proof of concept and commercial application. For entrepreneurs facing the valley of death, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, so in this sector, it's a bit tricky because it's so capital intensive. And that's why I stress the importance of digitalization solutions. Because that is an area where the capital intensity is generally not that high, and it's easier as a newcomer to break into the market. For the more capital intensive investments, innovations, it will be important to identify niche markets. So, and there's then an important role for governments to create these niche markets. Also there is a need to create the right market signals, because if we say that carbon is the main driver, then there should also be a price for carbon. We cannot say we want to decarbonize, but fossil fuels should stay cheap.
All right, final question. I think we have time for one more. Melvin Kizito asks, what is the future of cellulosic ethanol as an alternative to fossil fuel? Will it be viable soon?
So there is a number of plants that produce cellulosic ethanol. The economics are not there. The low oil price we've seen over the last couple of months certainly doesn't help. So biofuels is one of the few forms of renewables that have also really suffered from this COVID crisis. You can use cellulosic ethanol directly in cars, but it can also be a feedstock, for example, for aviation fuel. And there it's important that governments put the right incentives in place for alternative fuels. And a number of countries and regions are moving in this direction. So we think it will grow.
Dolph Gillen, thank you very much for spending time with us. Quite a lot to learn from you. Please enjoy the rest of the Climate Launchpad Global Final.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we continue with our program. Our next speaker is actually a pair of speakers. Let me introduce both of them. Amandine de Rosnay is a sustainability and geopolitical analyst. Amandine helps organizations adapt and lead in the global paradigm shift that is currently unfolding. Amandine's areas of expertise include geopolitics and conflicts, climate change, and the management of externalities of business. She works at Dynamia, a consulting firm in Mauritius. Also joining us is Felix Magaju. Felix is the head of programs at the Kenya Climate Innovation Center at KCIC. He leads an advisory and investments team that has supported over 400 enterprises in the clean tech space with both technical assistance, support, grants, and commercial financing. Amanda and Felix, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Suresh.
Felix, I see you're joining us from inside your car. Where are you?
Yes, well, I was having an event out of the office, so the event had just come to an end, so I thought it's good. Let me get just into the car and get things moving.
Make the most of your time. All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask both of you to tell us a little bit about what you do. I'm going to start with Amandine. Amandine, give us a sense of what your work is like.
So I work in Mauritius, and just to put things a little bit in context, we're a small island nation smack in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We're about 65 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide. So we are a tiny nation compared to India or Kenya. So we work in the consultancy sustainability area. And in Mauritius, that's quite new. And because we have such a small market, we usually work with all kinds of economic sectors, from agriculture, we have a lot of sugarcane here, to manufacturing, F&B, textiles. And so we help organizations to basically create a business that's a little bit more than just creating profit, but doing a business for good. So we work on strategies with them and on the kinds of initiatives that they could take to expand their
Medium-sized companies, startups?
We work with everything. Again, Mauritius being small. So we have some fairly big local companies. They are sort of conglomerates that have industries in multiple industries. They can be into the sugarcane and at the same time in F&B and at the same time in tourism, and they'll have businesses elsewhere in Africa. And with these companies, we usually do a lot of strategic work or help them with reporting, sustainability reporting or integrated reporting. And then, of course, we also do small companies and startups. With startups, it's generally, and small companies, it's generally more on the training side of things. So we hold a lot of workshops, training about, from sort of the very beginning, the awareness raising about climate change issues and sustainability, because here in Mauritius, we're only just really beginning on this trajectory, and to more complex training about their business or about doing a carbon footprint, things like that.
All right, over to you, Felix. Same question to you. Tell us a little bit about the work of KCIC and what you do in Kenya.
So thanks, Suresh, and it's a good thing to be here back again to the grand finals of Climate-Launchpad program. And just to start with work, Kenya Climate Innovation Center, just 8 years old, running both incubation and acceleration programs with a focus in 5 thematic focus areas. We're talking about renewable energy. So we're talking about innovations in the following sectors: renewable energy, water and business, commercial forestry, and waste management. Those are our key areas that we focus on. And what we essentially do, just in a brief, is that we support early stage companies and growth stage companies with technical assistance or business advisory services, and also supporting them in terms of access to finance. We have 3 types of funds that we have created. One, we have a grant fund that looks at piloting companies in those 5 sectors. Second, we have what we call the early stage financing fund, and just a bridge between grants financing and the PE financing. And number 3, we have a separate PE fund, which is called Kenya Climate Ventures, that looks at growth and scale up companies in those 5 sectors. So essentially, our work is to really look at early stage companies and how to support them via our incubation programs, and also via our accelerator program, the Kenya Green Tech Accelerator Program. We are able to take those growth and scaling up companies and support them and ensure that they have been able to scale. So essentially, just in a nutshell, that is what KCIC does. Of course, we have a couple of programs, other programs which are looking at women entrepreneurship, within entrepreneurship, but the key mandate of KCIC is in the green tech space.
Thank you, Felix.
Thanks.
Amanda, back to you. We'll wait for some questions from the audience, but before that, I have a few questions for you. Both Felix and I live in fairly large countries. Felix lives in a large country on a large continent, and I live in a very populated country. The challenges of an island like Mauritius are very different. The climatic challenges are very different from that of a large country. Give us a sense of what are the climatic challenges of living in an island like Mauritius.
Wow, such a good and big question. As a SIDS, we're automatically sort of ranked as one of the most at-risk nations in the world to climate change. One of the things that works a little bit in our favor is that we are a fairly developed country, and so we have relatively good adaptive capacity compared to a lot of other SIDS. But that being said, position where we are, so we are at risk of increased cyclones and much bigger cyclones that we're used to. We've been lucky in the last 10, 15 years. We haven't had much cyclones come straight to Mauritius. They can go around us a little bit, but they've gotten a lot bigger. And so the next cyclone that is bound to hit Mauritius at some point is going to damage us quite badly. And the other really big challenge, and that's not a sort of one-off like a cyclone, it's beach erosion. We've already lost, since the 1990s, up to 20 meters of beaches. and it's only accelerating. And that's really problematic for all our coastal activities, the fishing, the tourism industry, etc. And the ocean warming as well, and the ocean acidity is also threatening our corals. So Mauritius is really lucky. We're surrounded, the entire island is surrounded by beautiful corals. We have a unique endemic species in Mauritius that's not found anywhere else in the world. And all of these things are in danger of disappearing.
Yes, I've been to Mauritius. I mean,
Oh, okay.
holiday. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world, especially the world. Felix, can we ask you to hold your camera up a little bit? It's too low and we're getting too much background light. Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay, that's fine.
Felix, you being an African and me being an Indian, we know that our countries have similar challenges. While the environment is important, economic growth is also very important. How do you sort of philosophically balance these two things? We need to grow, and growth is going to cause some amount of pollution. But without the growth, we can't have economic good, and we can't pull people out of poverty. So how do you view these two forces from where you sit?
Well, thanks, Suresh, for that question. I think of late I'll look at maybe the last 10, 15 years, and I think that's when the impacts of climate change issues, or pollution issues, waste management have really come to the fore, and people have started realizing the need of really balancing, the need to clear poverty out of our country, but at the same time taking care of environment. And I think right now, even young people, very young people at tender ages, they can really witness the effects of climate change, delayed rainfall, very harsh climatic conditions in the country. Like the last 2 months, Kenya has been very cold, and it's the first time we are witnessing very, very extreme conditions. Cold conditions, and I think when you even look at the bigger corporates today, they have started really appreciating the fact that in the process of making profits and then emphasizing on numbers, they have started thinking, well, we need to really look at our environment, and what we need to consider, what we need to bring on board to really take care of the environment in a small way that they can be able to do that. And I think that kind of sense, awareness is really permeating so many corporates, so many institutions of learning. Cutting across all sectors. Of course, that includes the government. But of course, one of the key things is I would say that it's a little bit hard to be able to, because also we're looking at the cost part of it. It's hard to really say that we will be able to be there to get that kind of balance just in a short while. It will take some years, and of course, the cost of that, of course, is really heavy in both to environment and also economically. Because, for example, just to give an example, we had a couple of laws which were passed to mitigate against the issues of plastics, and that really had a big impact in terms of job losses, in terms of some companies actually coming off completely or being closed completely, and well, people start talking about, even if we want issues to tackle the issues of climate change, we can't do that at the expense of people losing jobs and people losing livelihoods. But when you look at as a green champion, when you look at the benefits of really creating that balance, it far outweighs some of these effects, of course, that we have as of now in terms of the economic downside part of it. But I think it can be achieved because even big corporates like Safaricom, which is a multi-billion corporate, they have really embedded a number of programs that are really targeting supporting communities, supporting individuals, supporting initiatives, for example, in green economy. And I think the last 10 years, there's such a massive awareness in the country on the need to be able to really tackle the issues of climate change, and that should not be at the expense of companies making profits, people's livelihoods, and all those kind of things. So I would say it's a thin line, but I think we are moving there, and then we like that awareness both from the government, from the public sector, from the private sector, and I think everybody right now is really aware of what is happening in terms of climate change. So that awareness is making people to start changing their ways of consumption, their ways of production, and then there seems to be, we are heading somewhere. It may take some time, but I think we are heading somewhere in the country. Yeah.
All right, before I let you go, final question for Amandine. And Amandine, your work also involves understanding conflict. Are we going to see a new kind of climate conflict in the world in the years to come?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So when I was studying conflicts in university, and that's about a bit more than 10 years ago, I wanted to take a course on the relationship between the environment and conflicts. And my professor at the time told me, I'm not sure that's really useful for you because so far the studies that we've done proves that conflicts around water, for instance, leads to more peace than actual conflict because it's such a need. And today, 10 years later, the narrative is starting to change. And we're starting to see that conflicts around natural resources are going to be increasing. I mean, conflicts around natural resources such as, blood diamonds and oil and gas have been going on for a very long time. And it's the sort of earliest forms of conflicts. But what's changing now is there are conflicts about access to normal everyday resources that are starting to disappear because of corporate encroachment or just simply the results of climate impacts. So we're talking about water, we're talking about areas that are becoming too hot to live in, and an increasing heat makes people more violent. So we're going to start seeing in big cities where the heat starts increasing and maybe you have some political conflicts going on at the same time. And if you have like a surging heat, that can increase violence and conflicts as well. So all sorts of little things like that are starting to emerge in the conflict literature, and also in interstate conflicts.
All right. Last question to both of you. One word answer. Felix, are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
Well, if you asked me that question around the same 10 years ago, I mean, there was some kind of big pessimism about it. But right now, I am very optimistic that actually the future looks good. In the midst of all the challenges that we're experiencing climate-wise and things touching on climate change, I think there is so massive awareness both from the private and public sectors. And I think people in their small ways, country-wise, community-wise, they are taking small steps to ensure that we are creating a balance towards supporting the economic growth of countries, individuals, and providing alternative livelihoods, but not at the expense of what is happening, of course, in our soils, what is happening in our environment. So I am very optimistic because I've seen so many companies, so many organizations in Kenya and a number of African countries really taking positive steps, creating roles, creating opportunities that really and really advancing the agenda of green entrepreneurship. And I think that's the way to go. And just to be very short and precise, I am very optimistic about what is happening. I think we are heading somewhere.
Same question for you, Amanda. Is the future green or is the future grey?
I feel like I have no other choice but to be optimistic, because the alternative is what? Like no more humans on the planet, no more planets. So the alternative that doesn't really suit me very well. So because of that, I'm optimistic and we're going to find a way.
Okay, Felix and Amandine, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Please do enjoy the rest of the global finals of the Climate Launchpad.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, before we continue with our next speakers, here's another couple of quick announcements I need to make. Welcome, Roman. I'm just going to get to you in a second. At 12:30 p.m. CST, we have What's Next, live after the startup competition with Ron Blomers. He's a Climate Launchpad trainer, founder, and managing partner of Start Your. It's a session filled with anecdotes, insights, painful lessons learned. Let these experienced trainers help you avoid common entrepreneurial pitfalls and share a laugh about the hurdles that you've already cleared. And at 12:30 and 1 p.m. CEST, Things I Wish I Knew, number 3, with Climate Launchpad trainers. These are the two sessions that are coming up next. With that, let me welcome my next two guests. Hira Wajahat leads the programs and projects team at Stimulus with a focus on sustainability, clean tech, and innovation. Hira is also the Pakistan national lead for Climate Launchpad. She's actively engaged as a business mentor and coach, consulting and facilitating trainings for startups and new business ventures. Hira, welcome to the show. We also have Roman. Roman Zinchenko is the co-founder of Greencubator. It's a smart Greencubator is a smart energy economy. Roman is a smart energy green economy advocate and communication specialist. Since 2009, he has develop ecosystem for green startups, social entrepreneurship, and sustainable innovations at Greencubator, which is a Ukrainian energy innovation network. Sorry for the fumbles, Roman and Hira. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Suresh.
Thank you. Hira, hi, I'm joining from India and you're from my neighboring country, Pakistan.
Absolutely.
So let's hear from you first. Tell us a little bit about what your work is like in Pakistan.
I think, and you would be well aware coming from India, that our work is cut out for us, given that just the sheer size of our countries, it's unimaginable. So I like to share at many forums that if I put at least 9 European countries together, it makes up for one Pakistan. And perhaps we don't have the same kind of infrastructure, we don't have the same kind of technology support. So implementing a program like ClimateLaunchpad, as exciting as it is, to get all those brilliant ideas from across the country, it's also a challenge and a half, because 194 universities that we try to reach out through, and through them find out those innovations or those young people who are working for the program or bringing up with these clean tech ideas. This year, it was a little bit different because, of course, the COVID situation meant that the universities were shut for 6 months. So, then we had to change our entire modality on how to make sure that we got the participation that we really wanted for the program. And what we tried to do was host some, of course, normally when we go and reach out to universities, we were doing small workshops like 1 hour guest speaker sessions, touching up on some topic related to entrepreneurship, related to startups, in addition to talking about the Climate Launchpad program. So we had to shift all of that to a digital webinar kind of a format. And we then, built up this modular program, which was a steps of startup. So right from the idea stage to kind of the pitching stage, created 6 small workshops out of it. And the mandate of each was to, sort of post it up on digital forums and tell people that we're having this workshop. It's free of cost. You come, you participate, and we'll talk to you about Climate Launchpad. And, if you have this idea, how you can take part in it. So that's how it's been for us. Of course, this was coupled up with, again, reaching out through partners. So the core sponsors for the program for us come from the corporate sector. So reaching out to them where we were trying to get up to one of the telecom companies and, saying to them that, hey, you have about 40%, I mean, as it is 50% of Pakistan is a young population. So you have outreach to this large number of, 40% of your consumers is perhaps already the young people between 18 and 35. So why don't you send them out like text messages and say, climate is changing, we're facing these impacts, and look, you can do something about it. If you have like some great business idea, why don't you pitch it to the competition and, take part in this? So things like that, we've been still trying to play around. But of course, I think for us, one challenge would just be reaching out to the number of people that we would like to. However, once, we are able to reach out, I think it's then almost the best kind of feeling to see the kind of craziness, the kind of innovation that is coming from very, very challenged backgrounds if I compare them to other countries in the world.
Thank you, Hira. Roman, over to you. Tell us about your work in Ukraine.
For us, the Climate Launchpad is actually a very essential, fuel cell we were adding to our energy mix in our efforts to springboard the clean tech and climate innovations in Ukraine. So Greencubator has been doing this work since 2009, and we consider ourselves to be ecosystem organization. And that's really interesting how collaboration and participation in such an impressive network brought us next level of opportunity in terms of collaborations, because when we met first France in 2016, Franz Nauta, one of the founders of Climate Launchpad, did introduction which was really essential for further developing the ecosystem, because he introduced us to our good friend Ruben Neuwenhaus, the author of the book called Startup City, which we published in Ukrainian and which became one of the crystallizing point for many initiatives within Ukraine's tech ecosystem. So Ukraine is known for IT innovations and a lot of development centers and a lot of software created here. And we're fueling the clean tech innovation. So now we are the part of an initiative called Tech Ukraine, where Ruben is the actually president, and which is bringing the topic of clean tech, and the CEO of Tech Ukraine was recently a jury member of the national final. So the Ukrainian clean tech sector is rather diverse, and we are happy we are able to provide the knowledge, resources, and inspiration to develop it further. It varies from electrical mobility to green titanium, from food safety solutions to cut the food losses in the supply chains, to heating, ventilation, and the air condition, from data science for energy efficiency to many other things. And for us, the very practical things we see in developing Ukrainian clean tech is how ClimateLaunchpad is actually contributing and helping to go to the next level, because it became the attraction point, the magnet for many clean tech wannabes and young entrepreneurs to start. And then we were able to provide them the next level of support to introduce them to some of the next level programs. So GoToYou, one of the top 10 ClimateLaunchpad startups in 2017 in Cyprus, has recently started the rollout of their own fast charging network, in addition to the apps they have covering from Thailand to Portugal. The Toka, another finalist from Edinburgh from 2008, has recently launched the grid balancing huge charging system in the capital city of Kyiv. Biosense was awarded numerous awards at the international competitions. EFA, the finalist of 2016, is redefining one of the most wasteful plastic supply chains, which is the toothbrush plastic, which is used for once very often and thrown away, and they're doing sustainable biodisposable solutions. Well, one of our guys from last year recently relocated to Poland, went to Forbes Poland 30 under 30 top list, and became one of the best startups. They called Green Bean. Atmosphere is now helping the solar producers to predict their energy generation from their solar parks. And Carbominer was accepted to Climate-KIC accelerator and recently got investment. So, and that's really important, because at the next stage, Greencubator as ecosystem organization and national lead for ClimateLaunchpad is capable to provide some of the alums with the grants for the further developing their green ventures, because we are operators of Ukraine's largest clean tech grant program funded by EBRD and European Union called Climate Innovation Vouchers. And for many of the ClimateLaunchpad alums, it became the next stage booster. And like for me personally, I'm immensely grateful for the work done by the ClimateLaunchpad team in educating like our team, because well, this thing made me the believer in the Bill Ollett's work. So I'm probably that's the most advocated book now for our friends and partners, for people coming by. And we see a lot of methodologies which was concentrated in ClimateLaunchpad workbook. We want to develop courses. So that's why we see another request from the community to localize some of the content into Ukrainian language. And we just launched the collaboration with Lviv Business School, which is one of Ukraine's top business schools, to deliver this educational program. And we're launching a new program which is called Greencubator Academy, which is largely inspired by the ClimateLaunchpad bootcamps. So that's what we do to develop the ecosystem which attracts, educates, and fuels the development of clean tech ventures in Ukraine. And we keep fingers crossed, maybe one of the next initiatives will be also covering some of the bordering countries we have in the region.
Thank you, Roman. Hira, let me get a sense from you of what the entrepreneurial energy is like in Pakistan. Is it as buzzing as it is in India, for instance, where we have hundreds and thousands of entrepreneurs vying for investment, not just in clean tech, across the spectrum of entrepreneurs?
I think it's picking up. We're probably maybe still 7 to 8 years away still. But the good thing is that a few years back, I think 5 years back, in fact, the government initiated a national entrepreneurial ecosystem through partnership of the Ministry of Telecom and ICT, and also the telecommunication companies, because we have four huge mobile service providers. And so they set up 5 incubation centers across the country and 5 prime cities. And that was kind of the start of, the tech entrepreneurship. Of course, it's more digital focused. Other technologies like health tech, fintech still lagging a little bit, but clean tech, these specific or niche sectors are now coming up. But yes, definitely, I think we've sort of come onto that path, and now things are where people are also. So I think with the ecosystem, the challenge always is to get the resources who can support the startups, because it's not just about the training. There's a lot of input of mentoring and coaching that needs to happen. So locally, those resources, I think, are still. People have started understanding the importance of these local resources, because we can't forever keep running to international incubators or accelerators or calling in people from abroad to work with our startups. So things are definitely changing for the better, and definitely picking up. We've got some. In fact, today I was reading one of our tech startups called Bikia. They have just raised, I think. I'm forgetting the exact figure, but a Series B round of about $3 million, if I'm not mistaken. So it's actually the largest funding that somebody's raised in Pakistan, and they have a simple delivery app in which people sign up with their bikes to deliver food or parcels or.
Look like 20 years from now?
Pardon, Suresh, could you please repeat the question?
Certainly. Give us a sense of if it was a world powered by fuel cell technology, cars, houses, all of that powered by fuel cells, what will the world look like 20 years from now?
Well, I'm in this context, I'm more technology agnostic. So I believe we are nearing the future where the homes and households and businesses would have way broader selection of the energy sources of their disposal, predict which would be dominant technologies. Surely fuel cells have the future, but one of the essential solutions to have them broadly and interested and monitoring very closely the different combinations of energy supply chain, like renewables, hydrogen fuel cells, or renewables, different means of energy storage, different of means of transportation. We just had a big discussion yesterday with the battery storage guys at our largest utility regarding the future battery project. So I believe fuel cells are really essential component for hydrogen power. One of our national finalists and the regional finalist company named Time Machine for Energy was actually pitching one of these technologies yesterday. So in this thing, I believe that the winners would be able to transition the housing and offices for new type of energy supply. So they will be able to do it with the least intervention. So you won't need to rebuild your house from the scratch or repair. So they will be able either to seamlessly integrate into some of the existing systems or do it like, very, very small scale surgery. But I'm a big believer of things where we stop burning anything. So chemical transformation, like direct chemical transformation into electricity is the big thing. Still, the inertia is huge. Like, let's burn something. Let's burn some coal, natural gas, green hydrogen, whatever. Let's burn it, make some steam, lose some energy on the way, turn some turbines, deliver electricity. It's a little bit of outdated thinking. But again, I'm not the person which would decide that. I'm sure that in many cases, the markets would be deciding, and the countries, the markets which are creating the biggest diversity would be winning at some point, both from the point of the sustainability, the energy bill, and the dynamics and resiliency of the energy system. Because one of the challenges for fossil-based energy systems, being hyper-centralized very often and being not very democratic, they have this single point of failure, which may lead to serious losses of well-being, money, if something fail, if some parts of supply chain fail and other things. So here in Ukraine, we've been through that period some time ago, both during the, let's say, gas wars with Russia, and some of the Ukrainian territories, the providing coal, are currently occupied by the Russian forces, which is unfortunate. But still, we have this flexibility of energy system we should develop. But I'm also closely watching other markets which are actively integrating fuel cells, storage, demand response to increase the grid resiliency and to increase this grid. So enthusiastic, not enough data to make any solid prognosis, but sure, we see some change ahead.
Hira, back to you. Last question. The Pakistani government, much like the Indian government and many African countries, is very heavily focused on growth. And growth comes at the cost of pollution, growth comes at the cost of emissions. So countries like ours, we need to grow very fast. So how important is government support, for instance, in promoting entrepreneurship?
To be very honest, our government is still struggling to understand a lot of things that are happening globally. And they are trying, but a lot of the growth or a lot of the different things that are happening are powered by the corporate sector, and the corporate sector is taking the initiative on that. But with the current government, a little bit of change has happened where there are now an increasing number of young parliamentarians who are defined as those under 45 or who are first timers. And contrary to previous governments, definitely more educated, more understanding of, technologies, innovations, things that are happening around the globe. So I think, again, we are kind of in a transitionary stage as we speak right now, but a lot still needs to be done. So, we're still trying to kind of shift from the old mindset to the new mindset. So it can go any way, to be very honest. We never know which day it falls back to the old one, which day it might just say, hey, it changes for the better. So there it is.
All right, Hira and Roman, I thank you for joining us on this and sharing your views from Ukraine and from Pakistan. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the global final.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Right, with that, allow me to welcome Sid Wallenbrett. Sid Wallenbrett is a water enthusiast and clean tech specialist. In 2012, Sid co-founded an organization called Elemental Water Makers to develop sustainable desalination technology to enable access to affordable fresh water using the sea, wind, and sun. Sid is the CEO of a company that is currently active in over 10 countries on 5 continents. Sid Wallenbrett, welcome to the show. Let's first start with, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Wallenbrecht?
Yes, but I think the G and the R are difficult enough. Thanks.
All right, so tell us a little bit about your work with desalination.
I definitely. I prepared a short presentation, so I'm going to take you through it. I did try to share my screen, but it says the host disabled.
Let me just see if that can be fixed. Just give me a second. I'm speaking to the...
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, can we help Sid share his screen? Sorry about this. These are some of the perils of working with long-distance technology.
Yeah, that is, of course, the challenges. Yeah. And if it's if it won't work, I'm going to do it without slides as well. But let's give it a little bit more time. It's always nice, especially, normally when you're on stage, you can really, reach the audience. I think a slide is very useful. But otherwise, it will be a dry elevator pitch.
And which country are you joining us from?
At the moment, I'm in the Netherlands, in the harbor of The Hague, actually, close to the ocean, actually with the ocean view. So we will talk about seawater from a good location.
All right, I'm just speaking to Andre and Dennis, who are working on the back end to try and help you.
Okay, now let me just start.
Seems to be a system bug. They're unable to fix it from the back end.
Okay, no problem. I'll do it just like this then. Let's first take a step back. I want to start with sharing a bit of my, let's say, my spark, my journey. A long time ago, I went on a surf trip in Madagascar. I'm not sure. Have you ever been to Madagascar?
No, I haven't. I've been to Mauritius though.
Have you seen the animated movie about Madagascar?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that movie doesn't really resemble the true Madagascar. It's one of the 10 least developed countries in the world. And I was making my way there to the capital, from the capital to the coast. And there I met a couple of young boys. And these young boys, they were carrying water with a vehicle they crafted themselves. And I was a bit curious, so I stopped there and I talked with the boys and I tasted the water. And I found out that this water was, it was unpotable, it was salty, it was brackish. It doesn't meet the World Health Organization standards. So these boys told me that every day they were hauling this water for 3 hours and it wouldn't allow them to go to school. And of course that sank in with me, and a couple of hours later I found myself at the destination. I was lying under the sun in my surfboard in the abundant seawater. And that's where I really realized that these unlimited resources should be part of a solution for the problem of water scarcity. And that's when I decided to focus my education on water treatment and sustainable energy. And in 2012, I founded the company Elemental Water Makers. And Elemental Water Makers, what we focus on is turning seawater into clean water, into drinking water, using renewable energy. And we've been doing this since 2012. We're quite an awarded technology. And I think the problem that we work on is quite evident. So water scarcity, at this moment in time, there's already 4 billion people that face this phenomena. And the problem with this SDG is actually that the numbers are increasing. So currently 2/3 of the world population already faces water scarcity, but due to climate change, these numbers are only growing because there's more people wanting more drinking water, but mostly more food, energy and products, which are the large water footprint. So currently we're using 3.5 times the Earth's natural reserves of the water, which means half of our wetlands have disappeared in the past decades. So to me, water is really the biggest challenge for humanity in the 21st century. We see it in the news, we see in Chennai in India, we see droughts. It's in the summer, it's not a question anymore if there's going to be a drought. It's going to be more like who are next. And that's of course not a good situation.
Could you try screen sharing again? I think they may have fixed the problem. Are you able to do it now?
Let me check. No, it still says disabled, unfortunately.
Sorry about it. Continue. Sorry to
No problem. So the problem is clear, water scarcity. But if we look at the availability of water, let's say 70% of the Earth, as you can see behind me, is covered by water. So we have a lot of water. And of this water, only 3% is fresh water. So 97% is seawater. So to me as an engineer, the key to access to more water lies partly in the sea. And desalination, the process of turning seawater into clean water, it's nothing new. It's been done for decades. If you go on holiday in the Caribbean or you go to the Middle East or Australia, you will just find yourself drinking desalinated water. But it's very energy intensive, which means that desalinated water automatically becomes expensive. But also it's a fossil intensive industry. And of course, we're trying to cope with water scarcity, but actually by desalinating water with fossil energy, we're only contributing to climate change, which leads to extended droughts and more intense floods. leaving the earth unable to capture the water. So we find ourselves in a vicious circle. And it's a technology desalination that's considered complex, not easy to maintain, only feasible at large scales. So these three issues were the main issues that my company said we're going to try to solve them. So we ask ourselves the question, how can we get fresh water today without limiting tomorrow? And what we did is we developed technology that is able to reuse the pressure from the reverse osmosis process. Now it gets a bit technical. But what we do normally for small scale desalination, you need 10 kilowatts for 1 cubic meter of water. And we came up with something that allows us to use 70% less, so only 3 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. It's called energy recovery, and it's a technology that we developed for small scale desalination between 5,000 and 1 million liters per day. And that allows us also to couple it with solar energy. And of course, we then need 3 times less solar panels. So what we can bring to our clients, it's a proposition of affordability and sustainability. And they go hand in hand. It's saving the expenses of water, while at the same time not having any emissions of CO2. And that's, I think, also crucial in this part of the business field, that you, first and foremost, for the clients, it's all about saving money. It's more like a nice to have that it's green. Of course, it's important for sometimes in the communication if you deal with resorts, but it's not always going to convince a buyer to go for a more expensive product. When it comes to water, it's also about reliability, and we do a lot of business in remote regions. So it's also very important that it's easy to maintain and to operate by local people. And we do that by using durable components, by remote monitoring, and by using automation. And that has led us in the past 8 years to be operational in 15 countries. Most of them are around the Caribbean, like Belize and the Virgin Islands. We're in Chile, we're in Colombia, we're in Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar, South Africa, Cape Verde, Philippines. So we have quite a global outreach up until this day. And for us, I think the key for our success is because there's a lot of end users for water. And of course, when we started out as engineers with the technology, we had to ask ourselves the question, which market are we going to focus on first? So we did quite strong customer development, also with the Climate-KIC acceleration program. And we interviewed possible end users, and we found out that resorts and private properties are the best starting markets to build up a portfolio. And while we built up our portfolio, we could transfer more to do projects for communities through NGOs and charities, which we are doing more and more these days. So we do projects for resorts, for private properties, for industries, but also for communities and for water utilities and for irrigation. And I think it was 2 years ago that we actually were flown in by Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Emir of Dubai, to receive a Global Water Award. And we were selected out of 138 organizations that are active in solar desalination. So all the way in this journey from the tribesmen in Madagascar to the Emir of Dubai. And that's really what it is, because at the end of the day, everybody needs water and everybody's interested in water. And yesterday I took some time off to think about advice, what would help me, because I know there's a lot of new passionate innovators today tuning in, ready to start a business. And of course, we had some learnings on the way as well. And I think what I want to share is because, especially as an engineer, there's always a niche, let's say a gap in terms of financing and sales and IP. But it's good to know that every startup is really different. So winning a pitch or award, even today, it will not make your business and it will not break your business. Remember that. Also, I would like to say that you should listen to everybody. There's a lot of people always wanting to coach you in your networks, but stay stubborn, because you're the only one who really sees the whole picture and who's really aware of all the situation. I think also once you found a scalable business model, it's really helpful to learn to say no, because especially if you're hot in the media, you're going to have a lot of attention and asked to do presentations and whatnot. But learn to say no and focus, because you have to get your traction up. And then you cannot do it alone. You have to have a committed and prepared team, also for the short term, but mostly also for the long term. Know what you're going to start, because that first roadmap that you're going to make that has the hockey curve stick in 3 years. It might be 5 years, it might be 7 years. So also be aware of what you're starting. But at the same time, I would say enjoy the whole process, awkward meetings, failed ideas. You're working on something you believe in, and that's, I think, everything that counts. From our side, it's always never ending. So we're still there's still a lot of entrepreneurship in our organization, although we're really in the scale-up phase. As you can imagine, with being an export company exporting to overseas locations, COVID is not a business accelerator, especially with tourism as one of our main resorts, as one of our main markets. But what we did in the past 6 months, and we launched it only last week, is we developed an IKEA version of our technology, which is basically the world's first efficient solar desalination technology that's plug and play, that can be placed within half a day if you have the sea and the sun. Just as a celebration of entrepreneurship, that you're never there, it's always going to continue, and you always have to be innovative. So with that, I would like to leave it. I hope you want to join us in solving freshwater scarcity using only the sea, sun, earth, and wind.
Thank you, Sid.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The part I'm most curious about is how does your technology actually work? What's the secret sauce in your technology?
Okay, so
much?
Let's say the desalination, it works just like a sieve. So when you desalinate water with reverse osmosis, you put a lot of pressure on the sieve, and only the H2O molecules are so small that they can travel through these small holes. Everything that's larger than H2O, so it's the salts, but also bacteria and the viruses, they will not go through the membrane, and they will be leaving the backside of the membrane as a separate flow. And for this, all you need is a membrane and a lot of pressure, which causes the energy. And what we did is we learned how to use this energy that's still in the saltier water, because there's still the same pressure on it. And we are able to use that energy to reduce the amount of energy the pump needs. So it works a bit like a turbocharger. So we take the pressurized flow and we turn that into motion, and that motion is brought to the pump. So the pump needs less electrical energy, and that allows us to save 70% on the energy.
Okay. One of the things that you said is your advice to entrepreneurs that listen to everybody, but be stubborn. And most people tell entrepreneurs to be flexible, to not be stubborn actually. So how does an entrepreneur know when to be stubborn and when to be flexible?
That's a good question. I think it's also a feeling that you have, and it's also something you will have to develop, because when you start out, you will not understand the market so well. So you mostly have to be curious and let's say critical. But once you've been there, once you've been to 50 countries, talked to 50 municipalities, water utilities, and 100 resorts, then you should be a bit more stubborn and understand your own, believe in your own experience. Because if you keep changing your path, also it will be difficult to create a vision and a mission, have your team focus on one direction. So I think the customer development part is where you might be more curious, but once you have the scalable business model, I think it's the part where you can be more stubborn.
As an entrepreneur working with an area that's going to impact climate change, what drives you? Let me give you options. The possibility that you'll make a lot of money, the possibility that you'll make a big difference to the world, or the possibility that you'll create a competitive product that's actually cheaper than regular water. What drives you?
For me, it's the second option, because we started out very idealistic. If I wanted to make money, I could have worked at a big oil company or a consultancy. But I think for me, it's really a passion. I can combine my passion with water in what I do. I have the feeling that this is really the biggest challenge for humanity, and there's too little people saying it. We are talking about renewable energy. When it's about climate change, it's always about energy, but it's never about water. It's not about, growing coffee beans in India, which are imported in Europe, that actually have a huge footprint, like 400 liters per cup of coffee. There's no renewable water label yet. So all we do is energy. So I think because of the urgency will increase, the understanding will increase in the coming decades. And I think what we're doing now is we're leading the way really with a solution that only works unlimited resources. And for me, that gives the satisfaction. So I just want to help people, help communities. We actually last year we started a foundation, and we donated a project for the community that I met in Madagascar. And I think those projects are the ones that that keep me and the whole team proud and going during the nights and the weekends.
That's it. So what are some of the competing ways of getting water? I've heard of water being condensed from atmospheric air, for instance.
Yeah. So when it comes to water, there's never one single solution. So if you have fresh water, you harvest the rain as much as you get because it comes free. You can treat groundwater and river water. That's, let's say, our conventional resources. But once they dry out, we have to go towards non-conventional resources. There's a lot of, for example, mist nests that capture water at night and then condensate. This is more in the terms of liters per day. Then we talk about cubic meters per day. There's wastewater treatment. We can actually treat human feces to such an extent that it's potable. And of course, this is hitting two birds with one stone when it comes to the development aid. And then there's, at coastal locations, there's desalination of seawater. So I think there's a mixture of solutions, and at every different location, one of these solutions will be best of its value.
All right, Sid, thank you very much for talking to us.
It was a pleasure.
Do enjoy the rest of the global finals.
And good luck to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Sid. Right, our next speaker is Kirsten Dunlop. I think she's going to be here in a couple of minutes. Kirsten is CEO at EIT Climate-KIC. Kirsten Dunlop joined EIT Climate-KIC in January 2017 from Suncorp, Australia, where she was Executive General Manager for Strategic Innovation. At Suncorp, Kirsten founded and led a bespoke division founded on managing and responding to strategic risks through innovation, transforming core business and industry models from within. Kirsten will be with us in just a few minutes, so hold on.
Suresh, Kirsten is ready.
Hi, and with that, we're ready to welcome Kirsten Dunlop, the CEO of EIT Climate-KIC.
We haven't
Kirsten,
gone live yet, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
You're live.
And welcome back. We're ready to talk to our final guest in this session. Her name is Kirsten Dunlop. She's the CEO of EIT Climate-KIC, and she will be joining us in just a few minutes. While we wait for Kirsten, I have a couple of quick announcements to make. The closing morning session, we're going to start again at 2 p.m. CEST with hosts Aldith Hooker and Farid Tabarki for more keynotes and panel discussion until 6 p.m. on how businesses and startups can work together in developing clean tech startup ecosystems and the future of clean tech. At 3:40 p.m. CEST today is the big announcement of the top 16 teams selected by the jury to pitch on tomorrow's final stage. You don't want to miss either of those things. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome Kirsten Dunlop to the session. Kirsten, welcome.
Lovely to be part of this.
Right. Let me start with asking you, Kirsten, tell us a little bit about what you do at EIT Climate-KIC.
Climate-KIC is a public-private partnership. We are funded and supported by the EIT, the European Institute of Innovation and Partnership. The European Institute of Technology and Innovation. And our role is to support and facilitate and develop and encourage implementation of climate innovation, both on the mitigation, decarbonization side and on the adaptation and resilience side. We've existed for about 10 years. We're part of a community of knowledge innovation communities. That's where the KIC comes from, the name. And we now work as we come towards the conclusion of the EIT grant mandate as part of the original setup of these communities. They have about a 15-year mandate to get going. We now operate with a number of other funders, public and private funders. And our focus is particularly, as a result of a set of reflections over the last 3 years, it's particularly on the question of systemic change and systems transformation and how we design, develop, deploy innovation in the broader sense, so ranging from entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ideas, new business, venture creation, through to education, capability, mindset shifts, innovation coming through corporates, through universities, and the combination, most importantly, the combination of multiple inputs for new business models, new logistics, new supply chains, new ways of thinking into whole places, whole systems, whole cities, whole regions, global value chains, national scale transformation.
Kirsten, there's a lot being spoken about decarbonization and the reduction of carbon dioxide, and not enough is being spoken, in my personal view, about adaptation and mitigation to changing climate. Tell us a little bit about adaptation and mitigation.
For us, it's, first of all, we see them as being two deeply interlinked and interdependent issues, and interdependent, if you like, as a polarity. One kind of completely depends on the other, also in terms of the solution space. We do actually rather a lot of work in this field, and we are continuing to build that up. A lot of the effort that has gone in, for example, in the work we're doing in industrial regions that are dependent upon high carbon emitting industries like coal, the just transformation work that we're doing in agriculture, land use, forestry, particularly in areas of Europe where there are extreme stress coming already from water scarcity or from changes in heat and temperature related to disease, to biodiversity collapse, crop rotation, and so on. So this is a topic, this is an area of concern that is something that is the focus of our entrepreneurial initiatives. It's the focus of a lot of the big systems transformation work that we're doing through what we call deep demonstrations. And it's certainly a major area of focus in the work we do on capability, mindsets, and social change, because we can see even from the effects of COVID this year as a case study lesson in the effect of both systemic connection and systemic collapse, but also and particularly the effect on emotional and psychological well-being and resilience that has a very nastily correlated effect on our ability to respond quickly, and to hold a course of resilience over time. So we know that it's not just a question of physical resilience and resilience to physical risks and physical change. We know there's a huge effort needed in building a capability for social, community, and, if you like, political model resilience. For example, resilience around democratic approaches, participatory governance in the face of stress that tends to then exacerbate extreme responses and a call for very directive governance models.
You also spoke about public-private partnerships. A lot of private industry is profit-oriented to a large extent. And I imagine that you are very public-oriented. How do you sort of bring a marriage between these two philosophies, if you will?
Well, in the first case, by working as hard as we possibly can to shift an either-or into an and, so that it doesn't become an opposition or a choice between sustainability or profit. And there are ample examples of where that just simply isn't true. You just have to look at the market cap of Tesla if you want to start there and compare it to BMW, Volkswagen and Mercedes all rolled in together. But in the work that we're doing, it's very much around, in part, helping organizations that have been extremely successful and profitable to comprehend the scale of risk that the climate emergency and climate change represents, and use innovation as a way of addressing renewal, business model transformation and renewal and resilience, so that profit is understood as being something that is possible as long as you are willing to change the rules of the game you are in and turn the underlying economic paradigm into one that is ultimately in favor of or investing in regeneration and renewal and sustainability. And we can see many examples on small, medium and macro scale of that being perfectly profitable in kind of industrial terms. I think where the major fracture sits is in timescales. Business looking for short-term, very short-term extractive above system growth are and will struggle enormously in a context that perforce requires a longer term view and a much more multidimensional view on value and value creation and value sharing. And it's really the question of shifting underpinning economic paradigms around wealth, around prosperity, as well as possibly really checking our assumptions on sufficiency as opposed to kind of growth at all costs.
You spoke about the need for systemic change, and systemic change, and to paraphrase what you said, requires the combination of many different moving parts and technologies. Give us a sense of what these moving parts and technologies are.
Well, let's take, for example, a situation that we are embedded in right at the moment, which is the city of Madrid, working at a whole scale of the city itself as a whole city. There was a point of departure and a point of entry which had to do with air quality and the impact of the mobility system of transport, but public and private transport, on quality of life, quality of air, and just movement, for ease and facility of movement. In order to change that effectively, one needs to have a look at urban design and planning, laws, financial incentives, but also then begin to gradually expand out and look at what's the impact between, say, the design of mobility and transport and higher income and lower income areas of the city, the quality of housing, the quality of energy emissions associated with those houses, the extent of energy emissions associated with those types of housing, and then start to look at what's the relationship between the green areas, the way in which trees and organic material, parks, open spaces are also wrapped up. And as you start to work on one aspect of this rapidly and immediately, you see the connections with others. What we are doing is to come at it from the other direction. So let's take the whole city and map it out and understand it and see it as a set of deeply interconnected structures of cause and effect of systems, and understand that there's an inherent complexity in those systems. They're not mechanical. They have non-linear dynamic factors. They've got people making choices, random choices, all sorts of every single day about where they live and move and work. What we are doing with the City of Madrid is to design a way of developing and deploying innovation using a portfolio logic that comprehends and engages with that kind of complexity and does introduce and look for the relationships between what you can do if you start thinking of trees as infrastructure, change planning laws, change financial incentives, change funding mechanisms. If you connect that to air quality, and if you connect that, for example, to urban farming, to rewilding, to community solidarity, to jobs that are not easily automatable, to looking after an aging population, to thinking about food security, you connect that to transport and mobility and urban planning design. And all of a sudden, you are in systems innovation. You're in multiple, multifaceted, connected inputs that are inherently different, that you are deploying simultaneously to understand how would you help that whole set of systems change together.
Thank you, Kirsten. Let me ask you a question. I'm joining you from Mumbai in India. Let me ask you a question from an Indian perspective. Countries like India and presumably Africa and the rest of the middle-income world and low-income world, we have a tremendous need for growth, and that growth is going to be fueled by energy. And presumably much of that energy is not going to come from renewables. How do you sort of juggle this need for growth and to remove people, take people out of poverty and reconcile with the environmental harm that that growth is going to cause?
Well, that is probably one of the million-dollar questions for the next 10 years. Can we find a way to do this without drawing upon fossil carbon? I think the job of organizations like Climate-KIC is to do everything in our power to find and scale up the solutions that mean that that growth can be achieved without relying on fossil carbon, so coming from sources of renewables in a broader sense, possibly than the way in which we are thinking about them. But also shifting a model of, so on one hand, finding new and different sources that are effectively scalable, but on the other hand, also really challenging and looking for alternatives to what does growth mean and how could it be done in a way that is participatory, that is sustainable, that is regenerative, and doesn't necessarily simply repeat the same trajectory that the world has carved for itself in the last 150 years and then have to fix it all up, but leapfrog it dramatically into a very, very different way of thinking about prosperity.
All right, this brings me to my final question, and this question is a moral question, again from the perspective of developing countries like India. We have a feeling, an emotional sense, that much of climate damage was done by burning fossil fuels, and much of that was done by the developed West, and that's how they have more development, they have higher per capita incomes, they have better infrastructure, better healthcare. In one sense, is there a moral question saying that those who caused the problem should be the primary ones to fix it, and don't look at those who didn't cause the problem, by which I mean India and Africa and countries like that? It's a moral imperative on the developed West to take on a greater responsibility.
So I personally believe that the developed West absolutely must take on responsibility for the effects of an industrial revolution and the scaling of that industrial revolution that we're all living with. And that is, I think, for me, the essence of the notion of climate justice, that there is justice to be asked for and justice to be given in the efforts that go into investing the proceeds of industrial development in a significant shift forward and in the accelerated exploration, discovery and deployment of solutions that are alternatives to that. I think the concern I would have of a one-sided debate, of a kind of a very binary debate between it's you, not us, or it's us, not you, is that it does perpetuate the possibility of path dependencies, whereby there is a sense of development and growth looks like industrial development, looks like high carbon emitting energy to create a higher level of GDP, after which you can afford the luxury of regeneration sustainability. And I think just from a pure planetary and most importantly human survival perspective, we simply don't have that luxury. We are going to have to get a whole lot more creative around a shared responsibility for keeping the planet in a condition that makes it possible for us to live in it. That, I think, means that the There is a question here around governance, the way in which governance is constructed, from my perspective, that does, on the one hand, recognize an onus of responsibility, and on the other hand, recognize a shared collective concern and the possibility for solutions to come from every kind of place. If I look at, for example, what I've experienced over the last 3 or 4 years of the Climate-Launchpad, what I've seen is creativity and solutions coming from places in the world that in that model problem might be left to sort of get on with industrial transformation while the rest of the world tries to solve its own problems. And yet they are world leading in their ideas for how to simply not carbonize and then have to decarbonize. So I think the model needs to encompass creativity from all areas. It needs to encompass and invite creativity from areas that have not yet got the problems that the Western world has to unwind itself from. And it does need to encompass, just as we have to encompass and acknowledge intergenerational questions of justice in the way in which we act on climate now, we need to encompass and acknowledge that the world we've built of global supply chains and global supply flows is not a world that is reconcilable with regenerative, sustainable living, and we need to design it differently. So it's a bit of it's not exactly a yes, it's a yes, and there are, like every large complex problem, a need for complex solutions that are adapted to that complexity.
All right, Kirsten, thank you very much for joining us on this discussion. That brings us to the end of this session. Thank you very much, and please do enjoy the rest of Climate Launchpad 2020. Right, and that brings us to the close of this session. We start again at 2 p.m. CEST with hosts Aldith Hunker and Farid Tabarki for more keynotes and panel discussions until 6 p.m. today on how big businesses and startups can work together, developing clean tech startup ecosystems and the future of clean tech. At 3:40 p.m. CEST is the big announcement of the top 16 teams selected by the jury to pitch on tomorrow's final stage. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Suresh.